Welcome to Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone. While I have your attention, I'd like to ask that if you like what I'm doing, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, share me on social media, and tell all of your friends, family, neighbors, pets, and livestock to do the same. I would appreciate your support via my PayPal tip jar, my Subscribe Star, my merch store on Teespring, or a place on my website. But you can support me further, and there are links to all of these in my description box. Well, I got some people over here in chat already. Hey, Marshall, how you doing? Happy birthday. Thank you very much. Yes, this is a post-Crisis on Infinite Earths watch party, but it also happens to be my birthday. And I got a little something for that I never drink, for obvious reasons, it being, Everclear. Will there be a cake? No cake, to be honest. My birthday isn't that much important to me anymore. I'm sure, as you know, Marshall, you get to be a certain age, and it just isn't that big a deal anymore. Yep. Hey, Debbie Lynn, how are you doing? Someone else here. Is there an echo? Am I having an echo, Marshall? I shouldn't. I got everything that looked like it should echo cut out. It's alive. Yes, 1080p and 70 frames per second. I had no idea just how badly my crappy ancient equipment was slowing me down. Towel is levitating. Well, it's supposed to be hanging on that tree back there. And I have the red skies, just for kicks. Am I having an echo, Marshall? That would suck. Yeah, but 1080p, 60 frames per second. Yes, I was amazed. It was, I did a test for it, and it went all fine, and I didn't have any lags or dropped frames. I was just absolutely floored. It really does make a difference. Yes, I know, Deb is your roommate, Marshall. I've kind of figured that out over the years. It's never been told to me specifically, but given the ways that you guys post and stuff, I've kind of figured. Oh, okay, everything's 5x5, awesome. Yeah, I'm amazed. I'm just amazed. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to reduce it for a live stream, right? No, I don't have to reduce it for a live stream. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test call-ins and stuff like that. I suspect I'll be able to do it, what with this brand new laptop that you can't see. Oh, man. So it is post-Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it is my birthday. I have a little something here that I threw together just for kicks for everyone who has a birthday on January 14th, whether it was in 1965 or later, or hell, earlier. I suppose there could be some people earlier than that. Well, here's what I have to say to you all.
Happy birthday, you thing from another world, you.
Oh, thank you.
That sort of seems to fit to me. So, since I'm crazy, I'll have a quick drink to anyone who has a birthday today. Very quick drink. It's Everclear. Oh, God. Oh, man. Are you buffering a bit? I'm buffering a bit in my face. Oh, my God. Yeah, I never drink that stuff. I never drink any alcohol at all. As Wilford Brimley once said, I got the diabetes, and alcohol tends to have enough sugars in it that it's problematic. But given that I could barely, I could still feel it going down, can barely tolerate even a single bit. Oh, man. Yes, as it was in Forbidden Planet. Smooth, too. I don't have 96 gallons of it. Thank God, couldn't drink that. Well, I guess, it being a post-crisis watch, I guess I better issue, just so that everybody knows, I'm going to talk about it. If you haven't seen it already, if you're on the West Coast, you probably haven't seen it unless you streamed the East Coast feed, because for some reason, of course, they still do that, but I'll have to issue a...
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. All hands, prepare for incoming spoilers.
Oh, yes. God. It is a spoiler alert. That is because I am master, even when it comes to this. And that means that the fandom is strong with me. And that means that nothing is new, nothing is original. And at worst, I figure it out about half an hour too early. This is not a boast or a brag. This is sadly where you find yourself after having watched, read, and listened to over 100 years worth of science fiction. You just can't see the new stuff for the entire century that came before, and you find out there isn't that much that's new in the world. And I'm getting an error. Sorry, I'm going to have to put on my glasses. This is too dark a thing. You're not receiving enough video to maintain the stream. Well, screw you. That's what it said to me the last time, and it was lying to me. So take me, let me know if something's going wrong here. I don't drink, and you went with Everclear, brave. Well, I'll tell you something I did a long time ago in a galaxy even farther and farther away than when I was an actor. Went to a party one time, and we were drinking, well, first it was vodka mixed with orange juice, so, you know, a regular screwdriver. And then we were just hammered, and we ran out of vodka. And we started using Everclear. That is the last time, aside from, I guess, when I celebrated that the Star Trek movies under J.J. Abrams appeared to be dead, that I have ever had Everclear. And as you can imagine, I was considerably more hammered that evening as the time went on. So, yeah. Talking about, I'm going to leave up my spoiler alert down here for benefit of people who may be on the West Coast and you don't want to get spoiled. This is a perfect time to mute the thing and come back when I have taken that off. I'll probably put it up multiple times throughout the show. I'm planning to be here, I don't know, could be 2 or 3 hours, just depends how things go. Crisis on Infinite Earths. What has bugged me about every single episode in this is that they have taken time out to do relationship work with the various characters from their own series. It's bothersome. I get it. I totally get it. I am not the target audience for these shows. And in fact, I haven't watched many of them. I used to be pretty religiously watching The Flash, and that ended a few years ago for the same reason that this irritates me now. It has what I like to call the Charmed problem. I watched the original Charmed back in the early 2000s, and I'm politically incorrect enough to say that the reason that I watched it was it because it had 3 hot women in it that oftentimes were in scantily clad outfits. The one with the mermaid certainly sticks in my mind. That's why I watched it. I really watched it for no other reason. And the issue there was they would do a lot of relationship work. I'm going to move one of my windows over here real quick. They did a lot of relationship work. They'd be in the middle of some great action or something, which was also good. When the action was good, it was good. They'd be in the middle of this great action, and then all of a sudden they'd just pull a halt to it. Oh, the giant pull back in the brake, and then they'd start to do, relationship stuff that just didn't really seem to me to be all that appropriate, given that they were in the middle of something horrifying. All 5 episodes of this are exactly the same in that respect. They have taken time out. They pulled a break on this thing to sit back and do relationship work between the characters as they exist in their own shows. This is not that kind of story. Let me just show you why this is not that kind of story. This is Crisis on Infinite Earths, as it was in the comics. This is the cover to one of the bound versions. It's by my favorite comic book artist, Alex Ross. He's extremely photorealistic detailed. It's really awesome. Hey, Larry, nice to see you here tonight. Talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths, I'm going to talk a little bit about the episodes themselves, so I'm not sure where you live, but hope you don't get spoiled. This was Crisis on Infinite Earths as it was in the comics. Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics, and again, this is by Alex Ross. Artwork here by Alex Ross. He didn't do the comics, but he did this cover for a bound version. Just an amazingly awesome writer. Artist. Everything he does is photorealistic, and he does it by virtue of having people be models for him. And so he'll actually have models who are doing these sorts of things. Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics was a year-long event that had 12 issues of the Crisis on Infinite Earths comic, but that it was one of the first really big company crossovers, where every single issue had to have, for a year in there, had something to do with, at least one issue would have something to do with Crisis on Infinite Earths. In fact, Marv Wolfman and the other editors at DC of the time, they sent out memos, and you can see it I have the copy of that bound version, and you can read it all out. They had planned this sucker for about 3 years. And Marv Wolfman and other top editors sent out a memo at one point that says, your participation in this is not optional. You must do a story or two that involves Crisis on Infinite Earths. Even if it's something that just barely, sort of touches everybody, you have to do a story on Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was a gigantic thing that involved every single superhero that was being published in DC Comics at that time. The only ones that were not affected were things like DC was doing Star Trek. They had the license to Star Trek. Stuff like that was not involved, but everybody else, every single other thing was involved in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yes, Larry, Alex Ross is on another level. Abso-frackin-lutely another level. Supergirl 63 has not come on here yet. Watch later. Don't care about the spoilers. Happy birthday. Thank you very much. You missed me taking a little... Yeah, what the hell? What the hell? I'm going to be on here a couple of 3 hours. I don't know how much of this stuff will make me hammered, but... in honor of my birthday and anyone who has a birthday on January 14th, I took a quick, very tiny swig of this. What the hell?
Oh, God.
As Marshall said, smooth. Oh, God. Makes my eyes water, my lips are burning. And I can feel it going down right now. Oh, man. Oh, God. Okay. So in comics, Crisis on Infinite Earths was a big deal. And it did what this one was going to do, and that's why, as a Fandi Master, I knew exactly what was going to happen to some extent, because I had read it back in 1985 when it first came out, and I've read different versions of it. That hardback version, the bound version that was Alex Ross's thing, that is a great version. If you're going to read Crisis on Infinite Earths, read that one, because it has all kinds of background information about how they built the story and what was going on and what, all of the stuff that they were coordinating for years before this story came out. Yeah, we love you, so don't die on you. Yeah. It's a Let's Watch Bill experience with a diabetic coma. You would not. I'm taking just a tiny amount. If I couldn't even think about taking enough that would kill me. Still waiting for your birthday review of the silent film. Yeah, I know. I got a whole bunch of them. If you want to go to my website at sylranch.tv, which is very much under construction right now. I've had everything else going on in terms of my new equipment, getting things moved over off of my ancient server, the same box that I was using before for all of this stuff. I got it moved off onto a Raspberry Pi, which went basically without a hitch. I was really surprised. So now my server is this big with a couple of 10 terabyte hard drives hanging off a pair of the USB 3.0 drives. So it's nice and fast. Marshall says if you really want to treat, ask him about the Star Trek radio series. Oh, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, that'll be something. Yeah, that's worth talking about sometime. Maybe tonight. So I'd read Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985. It was a huge deal, and they were doing the same thing that they did here, but for different reasons. Back in the 60s, this all started with The Flash. Back in the 60s, there was a story called Flash of Two Worlds, in which it was learned that the Golden Age superheroes, and there were a group of Golden Age superheroes way back. There was Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and then there was a Green Lantern, but he was a totally different Green Lantern with a totally different backstory. There were other superheroes of that era. The Justice Society of America was the very first team ever to come into existence. Weird part about Justice Society was they chose their membership based on what characters had a title of their own in their own comics at that time. If you had a title, you weren't in the JSA. It was only, and they would have members come and go because sometimes like Green Lantern would get his own title, so he'd go off. And they would pull in these backup characters. These were stories. What they'd usually do, well, back then in comics, the comics were like 40 pages long. And they would have multiple stories about multiple different characters. And the ones who were not the cover characters, but were superheroes in some way, would often show up as members of the Justice Society. So back then, I mean, they had all this stuff. Mark would be honored. Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm sure he would. Yeah. We're talking about, if you will go back, I think it's still on YouTube, but there's a thing that Marshall wrote for a guy that we know who passed away, sadly. But he's yeah, I appreciate it, yeah. But back in the 40s, they had all of these comics characters who were really popular. It was called the Golden Age of Comics. And this is, as I say, they had all kinds of superheroes. Not only Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and the big names, but they had bigger names from other companies like the Golden Age Captain Marvel that they can't use the name Captain Marvel for anymore because Marvel Comics got the rights to that name. So the character that we now think of as Shazam was Captain Marvel. And I will only ever think of that character as Captain Marvel. 80-page giants were nice. That didn't come along till the Silver Age. If you look back, and I have a lot of them in my, I have an Action Comics #1. Not a paper copy, because, you know, I have to work for a living. Copies of Action Comics #1. Action Comics #1 was when Superman's first appearance ever in the world. And copies of Action Comics #1, dog-eared or not, go for at least tens of thousands of dollars. I haven't checked yet lately. I haven't checked probably in the last 10 years. I bet they go for hundreds of thousands of dollars at auctions now. But the comics back then were much longer, and they were much more diverse in terms of what they had. You know, not only would Superman be in Action Comics, but they'd have like 8 or 9 different other full-length stories from other characters from very varying genres. Nobody knew back then that superheroes, when Action Comics came out in 1938, were going to be the big thing. But after Superman and Batman, and to some extent the other ones that National Comics and All-American Comics, which became DC Comics later, they were having such success that people like Fawcett came out with Captain Marvel and his family of characters, and let's see, I've forgotten what the other one was. There was another comic company that had the Spirit, which is a legendary thing. Then they had Plastic Man. That's where modern DC gets Plastic Man from. They bought the rights to that character and all of the characters that were running, except for the Spirit. That still belonged to Will Eisner, the guy who is the name for the Eisner Award, biggest award you can get in comic books. So they had all of these superheroes back then, and on the DC side, National and All-American Comics, which would later become DC, we discovered in Flash of Two Worlds, that was when the Silver Age started. What happened was they started to get more younger people because back then, through the Silver Age, comics were aimed at 12-year-old boys primarily. And what happened was the 12-year-old boys in the 1940s, they grew up, weren't interested in comics that much anymore, and the comic sales just slumped. In fact, Captain Marvel slumped really bad. Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were really the only ones that survived through the dearth of comic books, really between the Golden and Silver Ages. Captain Marvel was so similar to Superman that for 10 years there was a running court battle to get Captain Marvel shut down. And they eventually lost, but it didn't matter because by then their excuse me, the Everclear's coming back up on me. They lost, but it didn't matter by then because their sales were just in the toilet. So DC just bought them outright. Similarly, with some of the stuff that was being run with Police Comics, which was where Plastic Man was, they were all just down in the dumps, and DC took the opportunity to buy them. Didn't do much with them for a long time. Yes, national periodical publications turned into DC. There was also one in the Golden Age that was affiliated with National called All American Comics. But again, they both merged before the Silver Age to be DC Comics. But in Flash of Two Worlds, it was discovered that all of the people, and in fact, the Flash #1, they had sort of rebooted these characters for the Silver Age. The Flash in the Golden Age bears very little resemblance to the Flash of the Silver Age. Green Lantern of the Golden Age bears absolutely no resemblance to the Green Lantern of the Silver Age, with the exception of they both had a ring. But how the ring worked, the backstory, totally different. The only people who didn't get any reboot treatment were Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. But then we got Flash of Two Worlds. And in Flash of Two Worlds, and actually from Flash #1, Flash of Silver Age got his inspiration when he got his superpowers from old Flash comics from the Golden Age. So that was sort of part of his backstory from the beginning. But then we got Flash of Two Worlds. And that's where Flash of the Silver Age accidentally vibrated over into an alternate universe. Yes, Flash has been stealing this idea on TV for quite a while. He had and they did the same thing. They had it was one of the ones that as a fan I did a squee moment on the Flash when I was still watching it, because they had a similar one where they had what looked like the Earth 2 Flash and the Earth 1 Flash meeting up, or but that's what happened in Flash of Two Worlds. The Flash from the Silver Age accidentally vibrated over to the adventures where these Golden Age characters used to take place. And he was all surprised. This is all comic books to me. And the reason what they said was that the people who were writing the comics of that era for Flash's universe, known as Earth 1 from that point on, were actually in some kind of telepathic contact with the adventures of this Golden Age of superheroes. And they stopped writing them when they got older and got their own jobs and different jobs and that sort of thing. But the people who were involved in writing those on Earth 1 were actually in some kind of telepathic stuff with the people who had been writing the comics for the Golden Age. That's where it all started. And the concept of alternate universes is one that's been in science fiction for quite some time, and was probably best popularized, to be perfectly honest, with the Star Trek episode Mirror, Mirror. That one was probably the one that popularized it the most. Larry says, Silver Age was my boyhood. Oh, let me tell you about that in a little bit. So with Flash of Two Worlds, it established then that these other superheroes that we didn't see in Flash of Two Worlds, we just saw the two Flashes, must have been existing on that alternate universe as well because of All-Star Comics, and that's where the Justice Society of America was. And so they made a choice in the early Silver Age to break off some of the adventures of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman and say, okay, a bunch of their stuff, because they've been around since the Golden Age, must have been Earth 2 stories. And some of them were Earth 1 stories. And the backstories were a little bit fluid at that point as to which stories were which. Fans really complained about this for the next, 30 or so years. But they broke them all off. And they said, okay, Superman actually started his career in Earth 1 much later than the Superman of, Earth 2. And it's kind of weird they call, the current one Earth 1 and the other one Earth 2. And we just say they named them in order of their discovery. Well, the idea of these alternate universes was so cool that they started doing it a lot. By the mid-1970s, they had a lot of adventures that were still taking place. The Justice Society had come back into existence on Earth 2, and they were having their own adventures, did for a number of years. And they had other Earths that they found. They had Earth 3. I think it was Earth 3. That was the home to characters that were just like the ones that were on Earth 1, except they were all bad guys. They had an Earth S. And that's when they decided to bring back the Captain Marvel characters. DC had bought them years and years before, but in the 1970s they brought them back and started doing comics about them. Pretty much have been doing comics about them uninterrupted ever since. That was Earth S. And the reason it was Earth S is it was difficult when you're lettering for comic books. It's difficult to differentiate sometimes between the letter and the word and the number 5. You know, it's in context. And so they didn't want to call it Earth 5 because that was a little bit difficult. So they called it Earth S after Shazam. And let's see, there were other alternate universes that kind of came and went. There was, by the time Crisis on Infinite Earths had rolled around, DC had recently bought the rights to the Charlton comic book heroes. And those included people like Blue Beetle, The Question, Captain Atom. Those were the big ones. And so you didn't see much of that Earth because they just bought it. That Earth was destroyed about, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages into Crisis on Infinite Earths because they were destroying all these universes, and they were one of the ones that got destroyed. But Harbinger, who was a totally different character than what we see in this Crisis on Infinite Earths, had gathered up Blue Beetle because they needed him for whatever this crisis was going to be. Justice League of America had crossovers every year, every Christmas. They had crossovers with Justice Society of America from Earth 2. The first one was Crisis on Earth 1. When there was a big problem on Earth 1, they contacted the Justice Society, and they got together and had a big thing. Then there was Crisis on Earth 2, where something bad was going on in Earth 2, and the Earth 1 people had to come over, and they had a big deal. And they kept doing those every year, every single year. After, I don't remember when, but certainly by the mid-1970s, every single year they would have a crisis. And so crisis became a word associated with something big and bad and really nasty. And that's why when they came to this, in 1985, they called it Crisis on Infinite Earths. And the scope was gigantic. As I said, it included a whole bunch of superheroes, every superhero that they were currently publishing. The problem was by 1985, they had multiple universes in which these characters were operating. The Justice Society was around on Earth 2, and not only that, there was another super team called Infinity Inc., because the Earth 2 superheroes had aged, and some of them had married and had children. Whoops, I need to move this so that this, hang on a second, I got to move. I noticed that my cover image is not where it should be. There, one behind me. So they had these multiple universes in which all these characters were operating, and they were finding that new fans who were coming to comics had a hard time figuring out what the hell was going on with all these alternate universes. You had the Justice League, Justice Society over on Earth 2. Those characters had aged over the years, and so they had children or ancillary offspring of the newest generation. They had their own super team called Infinity Inc., and it included, among other things, Star-Spangled Kid. Star-Spangled Kid is there's a new series that's going to be coming out on CW about Star-Spangled Kid and Stripe. But Star-Spangled Kid and Stripesy were from the Golden Age, and via a time travel thing in one of the crises, they had been saved and put into the Silver Age in Earth 2. So all of this was getting very difficult for modern readers to approach. They go, wait a minute, you got 2 Batmans, you have 2 Supermans, one of which is much older. And in fact, it was a really interesting issue. There was an issue of Action Comics where Superman and Lois Lane got married, but it wasn't Superman on Earth 1. It was Superman of Earth 2. And Superman of Earth 2 went on to be the managing editor of the Daily Planet rather than just a reporter. Got silver hair at his temples, which has been a trademark now of any Superman character that gets older. Hair doesn't go white, just gray at the temples, just as they had in Crisis on Infinite Earths on TV. So they came up with this idea in comics of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it was going to involve every single character from every single book that was being published by DC at the time. And they were going to do what they did with this. Again, not surprising. I read this in '85, so I knew this was coming. They made it so that at the end of the whole thing, there was simply one Earth, and all the characters lived there. Then they screwed it all up. What they should have done would simply have been started from a new universe with new backstories for everyone. But they didn't want to do that with characters like Batman and a few others that already had this very long history, and they didn't want to mess with that. So it made things even more confusing. It was when did these things happen? What happened with it? Immediately after Crisis on Infinite Earths, some of the characters from the Silver Age were still around, and they remembered Crisis. They remembered what had happened. But then shortly afterwards, 86, I think, they rebooted some of those characters, Superman being the biggest among them. And what happened was with Superman, in the Silver Age, Superman had begun his career as Superboy. And in fact, he was really a super infant. And occasionally, even as a toddler, he would do things but not be seen. So DC at that time, and I think correctly, figured that was kind of silly. You shouldn't have Superman beginning as a boy. He should start out as an adult. And so that's what they did with the rebooted Superman. The problem was the Legion of Superheroes. Now, the Legion of Superheroes was a group of superpowered teenagers that existed off in the 30th century. Their whole inspiration had been Superboy. So now they have no Superboy. Where did they come from? And so they spent a lot of time figuring out how to get Superboy back into the Legion of Superheroes mythology by putting in a pocket universe where he had lived, and they'd gotten their information out of that instead of the regular universe. And then it got worse and it got worse. There were so many inconsistencies because they didn't just reboot. They didn't just do that. They had some characters rebooted, some that weren't, some that you thought some of their adventures still happened. Maybe they didn't. Who knew? So they had to keep doing alterations. I can't even list them all. They did it for a long, long time. Every few years they'd find, oh God, we've got another inconsistency that's pretty huge. We'd better work that out. And so they did this over and over again. And since Crisis on Infinite Earths, I don't even know how many times the DC universe has been completely rebooted from scratch. The last one I was really intimately aware was, I think, in 2012, when they did it for those superheroes, and that was a bust. That was a complete bust. So they've rebooted again fairly recently. I don't know the status of it at all, because after a while, reboot. Who the hell knows? Who the hell knows? And at the same time, fans changed. And it was a precursor to what we see now, in fact. The fans changed. They decided they didn't care if the universe was consistent, internally consistent, as long as it was a good story. They really didn't care. And this led to multiple superheroes being given multiple different origin stories and backstories, just depending on how the writer of that era, tended to be wanting to put them. If they wanted to say, okay, I'm going to portray this character completely differently, they do it. They would just take them and put them and giving them a different backstory, even without rebooting the universe. And the fans didn't care that much. The fans of the Silver Age, we cared a lot. One of the most interesting things was there was a shift in 1960s with Batman. Prior to the 1960s, Batman's Batman logo was just a bat. In the 1960s, they changed it a little bit, and they put an oval, a yellow oval around the bat. And so for the longest time, both DC and claimed, and the fans went along with it, that if you saw a story from the older story where it was just a bat, and not the bat with the oval around it, that was an Earth 2 story in the Silver Age. For some bizarre reason, it never occurred to them just to say, Batman's had multiple costumes. But that was the way they delineated it. Similar deal with Superman. The S shield that was used by Superman in the Golden Age was slightly different than the one used in the Silver Age. And so they said, okay, anytime you see a story with that S, it's going to be a Silver Age story. And in point of fact, if you look here, if you look closely, I'll put the other one back up for a second, if I can find it. Where's my Alex Ross cover? Oh, looking at the wrong thing. If you look very carefully, you will notice that the Superman on the right, He's the Silver Age Superman, and the Superman on the left, he's the Golden Age Superman. If you look closely, they do in fact have a slightly different S shield. Also, another thing that happened in Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics, the biggest thing, or two big things that happened in the comics. One was that Flash died, the Silver Age Flash died. The other one was, almost a bigger one, Silver Age Supergirl died. They couldn't do that on this Crisis on Infinite Earths. So they did 12 issues of this. They did every single book in the DC universe. The Marv Wolfman and the various other editors had literally sent out a notice that says this is not optional. You will be doing this. Interesting thing, little bit of an Easter egg. There were a lot of Easter eggs in Crisis on Infinite Earths on the CW. One happened tonight on the first hour. I think it was the first hour, maybe the Flash. I don't know. It runs together. I guess it was the second hour. That guy who asks Flash for his autograph, and he says, make out to Marv, M-A-R-V. That was Marv Wolfman, a guy who had one of the biggest hands in the Crisis on Infinite Earths in comic books. A lot of Easter eggs in this series that I liked very much. But there was a lot of stuff I didn't. So here we are, and we've moved into TV now. And again, for me, Larry, the Silver Age was mine. Although I was really, really lucky. My parents' generation, they were, grew up in and around the late 40s, early 50s. And so they had at my grandparents' ranch out in a log cabin that would today be something of a historical landmark, and it's gone now. It's too bad. The person who bought their land from them tore it down. I think it was a dumbass thing to do. But they used to store things out there. And one of the things they used to store out there was box upon box of Golden Age and early Silver Age comics. I spent anywhere from 2 weeks to a month out there in any given summer, and I like comics. So I got to read all of these Golden and Silver Age comics. They're gone now. They disappeared sometime a long time ago. I don't know under what circumstances, but a lot of those would be worth money now. You could sell those on eBay for real money. So I got to read all of those things as they were originally published, which was very cool. And at the same time, I was into the Silver Age very much. And again, this was at a time when comics were still aimed at 12-year-olds. They were not aimed at adults as they are now. So yeah, the Silver Age was also my boyhood. But again, by the same token, I was reading all these Golden Age ones that, for me, were happening on an alternate universe. So in comics, they decided they had to reboot their universe in a way that put all these characters who had been on different Earths into a single universe where they could, cross over a little more easily, but at the same time, hopefully, it would make sense. But they didn't do it, 100% well. They did. It was an execution was okay, but they didn't do it 100% well, and they kept having to reboot and reboot and reboot and reboot and reboot. And they're off into another reboot now. I have no idea whether anything's any good. I kind of stopped reading them a long time ago when they kind of fracked up Superman. So I haven't really been paying much attention to the current era of comics, other than to note that it has been rebooted over and over and over again since 1985. That was supposed to be a one-time thing, but because of the plot threads that were left over, that, the readers who were very, very interested in making sure that these universes fit together, that this was a coherent universe, they found that they had to keep doing stories to retcon, and that's where that comes from. If anybody asks you where the word retcon, retroactive continuity, comes from, there it is. It was because they had all these characters whose backstories they had to retroactively put into continuity of some kind. That's where the word retcon comes from, when DC Comics had to keep changing the backstory so that it made sense in their current universe. That's where retcon comes from, retroactive continuity. Larry says, DC and Marvel have kicked out their good writers and artists. Yeah. I don't know. I don't pay that much attention to Marvel Comics. I was never much a Marvel guy. I'm really a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They've done an extraordinary job. They have done an extraordinary job making a shared universe where it all makes sense. And they have plot threads that go from one movie to another. Some people find that irritating, but I thought it was great. Really, it looked like, Kevin Feige, who runs that universe, really knew what he was doing. I think it's why they brought him over to Star Wars, because here's a guy who could do long-term planning. Thanos was seeded as an idea very, very early on and didn't come to fruition until 10 years later. So he knew what he was doing. And so I like that universe. I was never a big Marvel guy for a variety of reasons. I just preferred, DC. I think it was probably because, and I mentioned this in my review of 1978 Superman. I mentioned that Superman is a character with whom I very much identify with, and I think if those idiots at DC want some good stories, call me, because you don't know how to write this character, period. Just end of story. You do not know how to write him. Call me, because I will give you good stories, because I share some of this character's backstory in real life. I know how this can be done. Debbie Lynn, not into comics, but I enjoy the movies. Yeah, a similar deal here. Larry says Joker movie is good. Slight references to comic book characters. Yeah, the movie Joker is good. I'll get into why any of that movie is an issue for me in a bit, because there's another thing that happened as a result of my watching Crisis on Infinite Earths on TV that kicked me in the pants, and I'm going to talk about that. Hey, Jay Haley, how's life treating you tonight? So in comics, we had this big thing, and they kept rebooting, and now the inmates are just running the asylum over there. There's some people over there that get, very good industry awards, and I think that they're just a boatload of hacks. They brought some people over to try to run the DC universe in films. Hacks. They just don't know what they're doing. They're just hacks. I really can't stand the modern age of superheroes at all. I thought the Bronze Age, which came after the Silver Age, which ran about 85 until, I don't know, whenever they rebooted the universe again. But I didn't mind some of the characters there. I thought they did Superman pretty good until towards the end. Jay Haley said, I stayed with the... can't read that very much. Been another reboot recently. Yeah. Timverse. Oh, God, yes. There's somebody who is getting these characters right. The DC animated universe. You want a good shared universe, go over and watch those. They're still great. And, of course, they have Kevin Conroy, who was in Crisis on Infinite Earths in Batwoman. He played an elderly Bruce Wayne. Didn't like that they made him a nut job. I didn't like that very much. But hearing that voice, because he is very much associated with Batman as a voice by virtue of doing that voice professionally since like 1997 or so. So he's been doing that voice pretty much continuously. They don't use him all the time anymore, but they will call him up sometimes, and he will do those voices for animated movies and stuff. So he's that voice, and that was a neat little Easter egg. I just didn't like the fact that they made him nuts. That wasn't good. Daniel Ardi, I think that's pronounced. Age-wide, okay, well, whatever, yeah. Jay says, I like the Joker, but it's way off to the side of the multiverse. Yeah. It doesn't occur in any other continuity that we know. It's an interesting movie. Again, I'm going to talk about that in a bit with respect to some of the other stuff that I noticed that I am not usually any kind of associated with when it comes to TV. So here we have Crisis on Infinite Earths on TV. Daniel asks, what will happen in Crisis Predicted? Well, I've already seen them all. On TV, I've seen it. They're in my part of the world. I live in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, a city for people who don't know, a city of about 340,000 people in the metro, which is about half an hour away from Omaha, which is a city of about 1 million. So I'm not living in a small town. This is just a thing that I do for my image. In this part of the country, it's already aired. I have seen both of them. I watched both of them on CW as they aired. They aired now. Where's my clock? I got a Windows freaking update as an insider. that turned off all of my stuff. 9:45. Yeah, started for me 2.5 hours ago, so I've now seen all of them. Joker director said that it occurred in 1981. Could have been, yeah, 1985. It references what's his name, Bernie Getz. Yes, there's some stuff that gets referenced. It does place itself in terms of time, but again, it's off to the side. It's supposedly the Joker movie would have been a inspiration for the guy who later became the Joker. That's an interesting little backstory, I guess. The Joker film, however, is much closer to something that could actually happen in reality. It's not really a character study of a psychotic who goes around doing all kinds of, super psychotic, super villain type of things. This is a character study in a guy who's, not got it all upstairs, and but it works realistically because this is something that you can imagine actually happening in real life, as opposed to, superheroes, supervillains. These are all fantasy characters, really. Science fictional in some cases, but fantasy characters. Jay Haley says, when I was GMing superhero games, I had the Joker be a spirit that possessed different people. That's why he wouldn't stay dead. Yeah, that's actually something that DC fairly recently has picked up, actually. The Joker being multiple individuals over time. I think partly that's to explain why the appearance of the Joker has been radically different, because over the last number of years, different writers have said, oh, hell, let's just throw out the old backstory. I want to run this character differently, so we'll make him new. And that throws everything about the shared universe into complete disarray. But that's something that's been picked up fairly recently, that this could be a person who, for whatever reason, it's not a single person, it is a string of people. Larry says Bruce Wayne is 8 years old in 1981 in the Joker movie. Yes, he is. Yeah, the movie ends with that. Yes, he appears twice. Yeah. The Joker movie does include Bruce Wayne at the end, particularly. So I mean, it could be part of some universe. God knows what anymore. Daniel, if you have not watched it, I hate to spoil anything necessarily. But there is some additional stuff that happens in there. But anyway, I'll get on to some other stuff here. So here we have Crisis on Infinite Earths on TV. They did not have to do this story. It was not like in 1985 with DC Comics having all these different universes with comic book titles taking place on different universes and new readers coming to it not knowing what the hell was going on. And so it was damn near a necessity that they put this all back into a single universe, so that readers coming into this could say, oh, this is a shared universe. This comic book is over here. That one is over on some other city, and they can sometimes get together. J.C. Haley says, I heard they abandoned the ideas of a shared, consistent universe. Pretty much, yeah. Oh, no, Jay, in comics, that's no spoiler. They didn't quite abandon it. They just kept rebooting the universes so frequently that what happened before, and different writers would use the characters in different ways and change their backstories. So you were never sure. It was like, as a reader, it was like, okay, I'm reading this story this month, but 2 months from now, somebody new could come onto this title, and what I've read now never happened. It's just crazy stuff. CW shows are crap written by soap opera writers. Yeah, I'm about to get into that. DC movies, not for the movies. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not a fan at all of the DC movies. I'm a huge fan of the animated universe. That was great. It was really good in terms of keeping, some level of continuity between Batman the animated series, Superman the animated series, Justice League Unlimited, Batman. What was it? The series that took place in the future, and even Static Shock, which was a very different kind of show. It was on Saturday mornings. The comics are just all over the map. Yeah, it's why I can't read them anymore. I just whatever, Jay, the DC animated universe was great. The people who are running the DC movies at Warner Brothers would do well to hire Bruce Timm and put him under the same restrictions that he was under when they did the animated universe. He had restrictions. He couldn't do certain things. He couldn't use certain characters. He couldn't do certain things with them. Batman Beyond, yeah, that was it. So they had all these. It was a very good shared universe, unlike the current DC ones, where I always like to point out, right, your starting point with superheroes is a guy who can put on a pair of glasses and somehow fool you into thinking that he's not Superman. That is your starting point as a fantasy universe. You cannot make that universe too much like our own. It has to be similar to ours, but with different rules, like they've done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's not a universe that's like ours. It has similar but different rules. So in a universe where your first character, the first one in 1938, uses a pair of eyeglasses to hide his identity, that's your starting point. You can't put those characters, like they've tried to do, into a real universe, something that's much more like our own. Because the first time anybody sees Superman with a pair of glasses, they're going to go, Superman, if something gone wrong with your eyesight? Why are you wearing a pair of glasses? You just can't do it. You have to have a universe that's similar to ours, but where that will actually work. Yes, and there was one on Static Shock. As I mentioned, Static Shock showed up. He had a totally different type of TV show for Saturday mornings, but it was still part of the DC animated universe. Some of the Justice League appeared over there. And then in a story in Justice League Unlimited, where they'd gone to the future, where it was the Batman Beyond the Future, he was there as a much older adult. So all these universes were still within the shared universe, and Bruce Timm made it all work. It was really awesome. Jay says, Chris Reeve and Brandon Routh both wandered around in Superman costume as Clark Kent and had people fail to notice. Yeah, that was partly due to, and I mentioned it in my review in 2018 when I did Superman from 1978. That was because Chris Reeve had made a very conscious choice, acting-wise, that Superman has to be a really good actor. Otherwise, people are going to notice. The eyeglasses, they're going to notice. And particularly Lois Lane, who's no dummy. She's going to know instantly because she's seen both of these characters. She's madly in love with Superman. So she'd know instantly. So Superman had to be a good actor. And as I pointed out in that review, he had a higher pitched voice as Clark. He hunched over. He was obviously a lot more meek and mild. But one of the big things that he didn't have was Chris Reeve's smile. Chris Reeve has had an electric smile. Brandon Routh has something very, very similar. It's why he was a decent enough replacement for Christopher Reeve. Nobody will ever play Superman as well as Christopher Reeve. Brandon Routh was a good replacement from that perspective. He'll never be Chris Reeve. Nobody ever will. But he did a good job, and he had the same choice, that Superman has to be a good actor, a really good actor, so that Lois and everybody else around him don't see it. But one of the things that neither of them had, and Chris Reeve, it's very obvious, was Chris Reeve's smile. Chris Reeve's natural smile is electric. He lights up the room when he did it. And Clark Kent didn't have that smile. He had a much geekier kind of smile that was nothing like Chris Reeve's natural smile. It was a conscious choice on Reeve's part to do that. Superman had to be a good actor, or else people were going to know. Let's see. Jay says Teen Titans was deliberately adjacent to the Timmverse, but yes. Elliot S. McGinn wrote the super character in 1978. I will have to come back and find the website for you. He wrote 2 novels in 1978. Elliot S. McGinn, and by the way, Elliot S. McGinn, because of, again, lettering in comic books, he had an exclamation point after the S. It was always Elliot S. exclamation point McGinn. And Elliot McGinn was, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, whether it's Magan or McGinn, but I got it McGinn. And yes, he had Clark Kent be Kal-El's hobby. Yeah, there is a website where you can see both of these novels. That he did 2 of them, Superman Last Son of Krypton and Superman Miracle Monday. And both of them were in continuity with the Superman of that era. And in fact, they pulled some of the characters over from those novels into the comics. But they're both in continuity with Silver Age. He made Clark Kent his hobby, And at the same time, it was something where he could go and he didn't have to be Superman 24 hours a day. And in fact, in Miracle Monday, his secret identity is completely revealed to the world. And at that point, he just takes to doing things like sleeping while he flies, because he's then forced to be Superman 24/7. Henry Cavill, Supercrew 63, says CW shows could be so much better if they would not focus so much on political correctness. There's that going on with it. Yeah, there's a big my perspective, and I'll talk about that very momentarily. Jay says Henry Cavill was a decent enough Superman. I'm totally okay with him, but he couldn't do Superman acting Clark Kent. Yeah. I mean, it takes a special kind of thing, and see, the way that Chris Reeve did it doesn't work in the real world. You can't. If you saw that from a real human being, it would be like a caricature. You can't put these characters in the real world. You've got to have a universe that is similar enough to our own that we can identify with it, but different enough so that the rules of how superheroing operates can still be done. So, Jay says, do you love those 2 books? Yeah, you can read them online. I will find the URL for it. I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to search for it because it's been a while since I've been there. They have a whole bunch of comic books if you know where to look. And chapter by chapter, both Last Son of Krypton and Miracle Monday on it. I have been working on pulling those down for some time. It's just an weird thing that I've been doing. But I'm working on pulling those down and putting them into an EPUB book for quite a while now. Several years I haven't concentrated on it. I've got a number of chapters pulled in, but not all of them. The CW shows are aimed at 11 to 21-year-olds. We are not their audience. Yes, that is the biggest problem with me, and I started to mention it, and I'll mention it here. In the early 2000s, when I was, 20 years younger and in my 30s, I used to watch Charmed. And I watched it, as I said earlier on, because it had 3 very attractive women, generally in scantily clad outfits. But at the same time, they would irritate me to a little extent, not as much as it does now, by suddenly, in the middle of action, pulling a brake and just bringing the train to a screeching halt. And they would start to talk about each other's relationships. And it just, it was irritating then, but I didn't care because I'm like, okay, let's get to the hot chicks. Now, yeah, Jay says, I am not their audience. People my age are not their audience. Their audience is people who are having those relationship issues now or are about to. And so for them, the relationship part of it makes sense. They like seeing those relationships because it is more closer to the sort of thing that they're going on in their own lives. That, for me, is the most irritating things about this show and the most irritating things about all of the episodes of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Jay says, if we watch and enjoy it, that's gravy, but we're not the ones with the commercials are aimed at, so we're not the ones who are aimed at by the show. Yeah. I mean, for almost every TV show ever, and this includes Star Trek and almost any incarnation, you're aiming, generally speaking, at 18 to 25-year-old males because they have a lot of spare change. And they're the ones that are going to go to the movies, watch the TV shows, buy the stuff on the commercials, and in the case of Star Trek or some superhero thing, they may be the ones buying the action figures and leaving them mint in the box. Yeah, and very often 11 to 21-year-old girls. Yeah, same deal. I mean, I'm not afraid to be totally politically incorrect. Women in general are far more interested in those sorts of relationship things than men. But men will go along with it because, again, it's something that's happening in their own lives that they expect to be happening. Me at age 55, a divorce and 2 kids later, 2 adult children later, I could care less. To me, it's just soap opera. But I get it. I'm not the audience. I'm not what they're aiming for, at all. Your ex and your daughters watched Charmed. Yeah, well, so did I, although, maybe for different reasons that I did. I'm perfectly happy to be totally politically incorrect. I was watching for the hot chicks. I was watching for, I don't know, when Alyssa Milano was mermaid for 2 episodes, had a pair of pasties, and that's all she was wearing on the top. Those are the sort of things I watched. And hey, I'm old enough and stupid enough to admit it. Jay says, I found it really sad, dumb, and plain imitation of Buffy, which was much better. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Joss Whedon is a freaking genius. So yeah. Super Crew 63 says, Buffy was awesome. Jay says, Alyssa Milano can just stand there. As long as she doesn't open her mouth, in real life. As long as she doesn't open her mouth. I find her tweets just positively irritating as hell. Jay says, for the CW, especially Supergirl is a girl's show. Yeah, and I have not watched Supergirl with any regularity, really. I have not watched it for years. I started watching it when it first was on because I was curious. Oh, okay, we've got an alternate universe with Supergirl on it. Cool. But it very quickly devolved into the sort of thing with, all these relationship things, and I just like, oh, God, no. And now I'm told that it gets really politically incorrect. I've not watched that show. I can't tell you about it. Political correctness sells to a certain audience, but not to the general audience. And I think ultimately it'll be the downfall of any of these shows. Jay says, well-handled relationships issues, smartly written, are just fine for drama, but idiot soap opera. It's just soap opera stuff for the most part. If you were going to do a relationship show for me, it would be much, much more adult. It would be something with, older people who have been through, a divorce or something like that, and so have a different take on it, and a different way of approaching it. That it's not, oh God, all these things that are happening, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, are we ready to do this sort of thing again? Having not dated for decades, are we really ready for this? And we know what an adult relationship entails. We don't have to go through it. We know what it is. Jay says, I am okay with some of the things she says. Again, with Alyssa Milano. I don't know. I'm okay with a couple of them. Mostly, I just find her really irritating. But, your mileage may always vary. Jay says, I watched until they did the Dominators crossover, and then I just noped out of the CW shows. You don't know why. Again, I used to watch Flash pretty regularly until it became so frequent that they would pull the brakes, stop the train, and do the relationship stuff that I was like, I can't watch this anymore. Even the superheroics weren't enough to keep me through. When I was watching it, I was watching it after the fact, after it aired, and so I would just like, oh God, I don't need to see this. I know what's going to happen. Move forward till we get some action again. In fact, when I rewatched the first 3 episodes of Crisis on Infinite Earths earlier today, I found myself doing just that. And it's amazing how little action is actually in these shows. Let's see. Yes, Larry says they should kill Supergirl in this CW Crisis incarnation. Almost looked like they might. They did kill her in Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was one of the biggest changes they made. And it looked for a moment like they were going to do the exact same thing. But of course, you knew her show was continuing, so she wasn't going to die. Larry says, Jay says, it's not due to drive-by drama of characters not talking to each other while keeping the series has almost destroyed the world 4 times in the last 90 days. Yeah, I have not watched Arrow either, Jay. I really haven't, Arrow for me was season 1, and I know it changed. Everybody told me it changed. But season 1, he was just going around murdering people. And I was like, I'm not down with that for a superhero. Turn it off. Again, everybody's told me that it changed, but I just never got into it. Flash, I watched a lot until the relationships became pull the brakes and stop the train all the time. Supergirl, I watched for a bit. I guess most of the first season. I guess I did know what was going on when the Flash crossover happened. But about that time, I started to kind of drift away. About the time that she was getting into a relationship with James, formerly Jimmy Olsen, I just said, okay, this is more of the same. I'm stopping watching. Lost you in the second season, yeah, in Arrow. I said, oh yeah, you tended to watch the files on 1.5 speed, just so the drama would slide by faster. Take the Flash. You can't really watch that at 1.5 speed, but I was all the way through the first 3 episodes on this, I was like, okay, I don't need to hear this relationship stuff. It's just so much of it. And there's really that little action. And that is one of the problems with this crossover. Jay says, interesting, in the second season, there was an episode where the Huntress was twanging people all over, but she got into a guy with a speaking part, and Arrow said, no, that would be murder. Yeah, spent a whole year killing people that I watched that season. Supergroove 63 says, Arrow was the best of the bunch. Legends of Tomorrow was a lot more fun to watch. I have not kept up with Legends of Tomorrow. I think I saw the first. I just haven't kept up with it. I probably should go back and watch some of it. I'm told that it's probably, like you say, the best of the bunch. I just haven't kept up with them. I haven't really kept up with them. So, a lot of the relationship stuff going on here, I'm not invested in the first place because it seems like soap opera to me. But B, I'm not invested to it at all because I haven't been watching these shows very regularly. And as with all modern TV shows, you got to keep on with it because the relationships are dynamic and they change all the time. Jay Haley says, like murdering NPCs and extras is fine, but not a named character. Yeah, and you were like, nope. Jay says they had some cute girls trying their best to act, though, in Legend of Tomorrow. I like Melissa Benoist. I do. I like her. I think she's a good actress. Not a fan of that character wearing pants, to be perfectly honest. In comics, she has always worn a skirt, and to me, like Superman's trunks, she doesn't look right without it. It's just me having read all those comics for decades and decades, but I don't think she looks right without a skirt, and it was one of the things I wish they hadn't lost in the current series by the time I was watching Crisis on Infinite Earths. So Bill, yes. So, okay, so here we are with Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I knew going into it because I'd read the original, which was much more epic. It had to be. Every superhero in every title that DC was, doing at the time had a story of some kind, maybe 2, that they were involved in the Crisis. Now, here was the thing. If you wanted to read Crisis on Infinite Earths, you could just read the 12-issue Crisis on Infinite Earths series and get the story. But some of the ancillary stories, if you wanted to go back and read those, and I've got a collection that somebody put up as a torrent that has all of the ones that had tie-ins and the reading list order that you should read them in order to get it. And sometimes those added some very interesting things to the story. But again, you didn't have to read those. Although, DC saying that you're doing this is not optional was in part a marketing thing. They wanted you to go over and pick up the books that you weren't reading and see some sales increases. And in fact, they did. Jay asks, why am I reviewing a crossover event for shows I don't watch anymore? Because I have a strong emotional connection to Crisis on Infinite Earths by virtue of reading it in 1985 when it first came out. The pants and the haircut is a failure. I don't like the bangs either. Supergirl, Melissa Benoist, she's very cutie pie, easy on the eyes. Yes, you tried with the New 52, just could not. Yeah, I tried reading some of New 52 as well. DC has lost me. They have done so many reboots that just failed miserably, or so many reboots that they had to do because Crisis on Infinite Earths led certain things hanging that had to be reconciled, and they kept doing that over and over again. So with Crisis on Infinite Earths, I had to, on CW, I had a good idea going in what was going to happen, more or less. Obviously, it wasn't going to be as epic as this, with every hero in the universe, because they didn't, multiverse, because they didn't have that many heroes on CW. Just didn't have that level of epicness. So, I was not particularly interested in the characters. I was interested in how they were going to execute this. This was a gigantic event, and they don't have the same number of people. How are they going to execute this? So I was more interested in the execution than it necessarily was anything else. Jay says the most recent reboot was Superman versus Dr. Manhattan. Yes, I've read the first 11 issues, and I'm going to read the 12th here sometime soon when I can get a hold of it. Superman, by being Superman at Manhattan, persuaded him to recreate the DC universe in a more classic DC look. Well, I hope that's the case. I don't know. Maybe I'll start picking up some of those books, but, if they're still being written by the same idiots, I don't know if they're going to do the stories right. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll pick up some of those. I still have yet to read the 12th issue of the Doomsday Clock. I have read the first 11. And I could see where they're going with that, too, doing another reboot. Again, another reboot. So we'll see how that goes. If you watch my review of Superman from in 2018 that I did, 1978 Superman, I said, maybe on that episode, I think, I said how I would fix the DC universe in films. And for my money, you would have Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman operating in the 1940s, because they were characters who thrived most in the 1940s, and I would put those characters there and age them out, let some of them die, and by the time we get to the current era, Superman, who is aging much more slowly, would have thrown away the Clark Kent identity. In a modern world with 24/7 surveillance of everyone, he couldn't get away with that anymore. What's the point? And Lois would have been, dead as an old woman. So he was somebody who'd just hang out with the Justice League and pretty much run that show. And every once in a while, he'd say, this looks like a job for Superman. And he'd have a Superman movie. So that's what I would do with those in a nutshell. Jay says, I saw a clip that seemed to suggest that the multiverse antimatter would wipe out people like Tom Welling to show that it destroyed the multiverse. That noped me out with the whole thing. Tom Welling on this was given a good cameo. He was not killed on screen. Obviously, he must have been killed off screen because all of these characters were. But he was given a nice set of scenes. He was given a nice set of scenes where he was staring down Lex Luthor from the Earth 1 universe and walked away with as good a happy ending as we're going to get, knowing that he's going to get killed along with all of these other characters. Noped out of it eventually, which is weird because I made Smallville as a strip mining DC to recreate something like Buffy. Yeah, I think that's true. I didn't mind Smallville. I didn't keep up with it that much, but I did like the way the characters were handled when I saw it, and I liked Tom Welling's cameo, scene or two that he gets. See, he got a whole scene, and I like the way that they did that, and they were smart enough not to kill him on screen. They were smart enough to let him walk away with what was going to be as happy ending as you could get, knowing that, he was going to be dead by the end of this. So, watching the show and the execution of it, I think the execution was as good as you could do, given that you didn't have all of these superheroes, and that you pulled the brakes on the train all the time to do this talking about relationship stuff. If I were doing this, there would be the one show where I did not do the relationship stuff. I would just say, nope. That belongs over in their own TV shows. Here, we're just going to have them doing action. We're going to go from one thing to another, and it's going to be complete action, and we're going to have enough action that the series itself makes sense. We're not going to constantly put the brakes on to do all this relationship stuff. Did Brandon Routh's Superman meet the Atom? Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. They made several comments about how it was really weird. But yes, he did. That was one that bothered me. They made explicitly very, very clear that Brandon Routh's Superman was the same Superman that was played by Christopher Reeve and started in 1978. He lived on Earth 78. What they did, first thing that I didn't like with it, because that's my Superman. Chris Reeve, 1978 Superman will always be my Superman. And they killed off the 1990s Flash. Yes, they did. But it was very well done. It was very, very well done. It was kind of poignant. They went back and they had as he was going away, they had a quick scene from the 1980s Flash TV show between he and forget the character and the actress's name now. It's been so long. Quick flashback with her, and then he died. I was well done. I thought that was not a bad way to go. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, Silver Age, Flash died, and the way he died, he was saving the world, saving the universe, but doing it in such a way that he kept going backwards in time. So he would be getting older as he did it. He was aging really hyper fast as he was doing it, and then at the end just sort of collapsed into a pile of dust. But he would be going back in time and seeing these characters that he had, previously had some dealings with, but he'd be there just briefly, leaving those characters going, what in the hell? Sometimes it would be in their own books. Flash would just show up out of nowhere for no reason, be there for 5 seconds and then be gone. And he'd be like, what? And it was, again, he was moving backwards in time as he saved the world. That was one of the biggest things, was they killed off Barry Allen. So doing it with a 1990s Flash, I was okay with that. I mean, you knew that they weren't going to do it with Earth one. Just wasn't going to happen. He's got his own series. It's still going on. They're not going to kill him off. It wasn't like Arrow, which is ending at this is their last season. So, you could kill off Arrow, but the others had to survive because they have their own, shows going forward, and you knew that. So, that part was going to be predictable. You knew going in that for some of these characters, there were no real stakes. There were no real life or death stakes because they have their own shows. You're not going to kill them off. So again, watching the execution of it, the biggest problem for me was, that they kept constantly pulling the brakes on the train. And if it was me doing a show like this, big crossover, everything in the multiverse is at stake, I would not have them suddenly stop to do relationship stuff. I would have them just keeping on with the action. And if they'd had more of that action, they would have had more of a story that you saw on screen. And it would have been a lot more epic. Jay says the best thing about a crisis in an action series is that the characters are on the horns of dilemma. Yeah, they have to choose A or B. Lives are on the line. What's right? What's wrong? Yeah, the plane is going down. Everything on fire. Your true love is about to marry that other person, and the bombs are about to go off. Do the thing now. Yeah. It should have just been action. You could stop and do exposition and scenes where things happen that make sense given what you're about to see in the rest of it. But there was a lot of shorthand in the series on CW because of that. Because they kept stopping to do relationship stuff, they would have a whole lot of things that were shorthand. And that means that somebody would come in and say, oh my God, this thing just happened. Well, in drama, it is always better. You must always, especially in visual drama, show, not tell. It's more effective to show. So if somebody comes in and said this horrible thing just happened, that's something you should have seen. You shouldn't have had somebody go in and said that. And you use these to torture the character, find out what they're made of in their deeper levels. Yeah, exactly. And when you stop and pull the brakes on it, and you just do relationship stuff that really should be in their own shows, if they're going to happen at all, then it becomes a little problematic. You should be showing what's happening. And as Jay says, you should be doing it in such a way that you see what these characters are made of right down, at their core. What decisions are they going to make? And in this case, the decisions were not just for everyone they knew, not just for their own entire universes, but for every universe. You don't. It's one thing when you have this number of characters, because you get a feeling for just how epic this is. This is going to affect everything and everyone. And when you do it on TV, it is a little difficult to get across the idea that you are having infinite upon infinite upon infinite upon infinite deaths. All of these people are dead. Not even billions, not even trillions, not even quadrillions. An infinite number are dead. That are the stakes. Those are the really high stakes. You shouldn't be stopping to have this relationship stuff. Every one of these characters should be going, I can't do this right now. I'm sorry, I can't do it right now. We've got to, this is horrible. We've got to, we've got to save somebody, Make Supergirl choose between her sister and the city of Argo. Yeah. Make Superman choose between Lois Lane and Krypton. Make Jay choose between a cat and barbecued ribs, you monster. Yeah. At the beginning of the first one, when it looked like, Lois and Clark were dead, I was okay with that. I thought, oh, that's nice. That is a callback to the 1978 Superman. They used some of the same dialogue. But B, at the same time, it's like, oh, this is a big parallel. This is Superman sending his child off in a rocket ship just as he was sent off in a rocket ship. I was kind of okay with that. But then they reversed it, lost, and what dramatic impact it had was then just lost because he and Lois were saved at the last minute. Off screen. You didn't see it. That's what, see, not show, not tell. Jay says, Star Trek discovered this. For TV, the best stories are close up. In the face. Personal stories. Kirk has to let Edith Keeler die. The focus is on his face and how it affects him. Yes. The stakes for Crisis on Infinite Earths, whether it's this or CW, are infinite. They're the biggest stakes you could ever possibly have. You really shouldn't be pulling the brakes to do, you need to have the action moving constantly, and you need to have things happening in the story so that you don't have somebody coming in and say, oh, this thing happened off screen, we got to deal with it. You should be having this like, oh, here I am, the thing is happening, You cannot show millions or billions. You can show individual people. Yeah, and that was the same thing in the Supergirl version episode they did. They were trying to evacuate the planet. Let that sink in for a moment. 7 billion people that they were trying to evacuate. And they got several billion evacuated. No. Just no. There's no way. There is absolutely no way that you could do that. It would be impossible. You could not evacuate that many people from that Earth. And it didn't matter anyway. Whatever dramatic impact that was supposed to have, and it was the dramatic impact was Oliver Queen's death. That was, and I get it. Even for me, that was well acted enough that it was dramatically impacted for me. And people that watched that show, no doubt, it was really impacted to see Oliver Queen die. I'll talk about how they undermined that again in a minute. But seeing Oliver Queen die would have been really impacted for people who watched that show. And he did it. He did that well. They did that really well. The Monitor was there pulling them all out because, he said the battle's lost. We got to keep going and, save this for future battles. And there's a great line, a really good line that I loved that Oliver Queen had. And it showed his character, like you say, Jay, showed his character and why his send-off was so good. It was his last stand. It was when the Monitor said, it's time to go. And he says, has the planet been evacuated? And the Monitor says, no. And he says, then it's not time. Great. I loved that moment. That one line out of the whole show. I just went, that's great. That is a super heroic thing to do. It is Oliver's last stand. He knows that he's going to die. He knows there's no way out. But he's going to keep fighting because the longer he fights, the more people he can save. Well written. I wish the rest of it had been that well written. That one line, then it's not time. Brilliant, just brilliant. Larry J says evacuate billions. Yeah, right. Put a surprise extra 3 billion people on Earth and watch how it affects the infrastructure. Yeah, and what billions are you saving? I mean, are you going to save all the starving people in Africa? Or are you saving people in the first world, Millions of spaceships to evacuate? No and no. Yes, Larry, that's exactly right. It was a dumb premise, and I'm sitting there cringing through the whole thing. I was like, no, if you're going to do that, you need to have, show individual characters. Maybe even just people who are walking on, that don't have anything to do, show that how they're going to deal with what is obviously certain death. That would be good. Yeah, half the people on Earth disappear, then 5 years later they all come back. In this case, it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. It didn't matter. That entire section, that entire episode where they're saving all these people just doesn't matter. And I knew it wasn't going to matter. They were going to pull all this stuff into a single universe, as they did at the end, which means that all of those people were going to have their backstories anyway in this new universe. What's the point? It would have been better to show people, having to come to terms with, I only have hours, minutes to live. How do I do the last few minutes of my life? So So we had Supergirl, and that was my biggest problem with that. As I say, I'm not particularly emotionally invested in Oliver Queen's death scene so much, although I get that people who are into that show probably were. But I really liked, has the planet been evacuated? No? Well, then it's not time. And he goes off, and last stand, and very well done, I thought. Then we got into the Batwoman one. The Batwoman episode, I have been following Batwoman. It's one of the shows that I'm going to be reviewing. I did one on it when I was doing politics, and I'm going to keep reviewing it. And I'll tell you in all honesty, there's only one reason I'm going to keep reviewing. Because people who are reviewing that show are getting views. And that's because that show sucks in many, many different ways. Part of it's the incredible political correctness, and part of it is that, you know, I like Ruby Rose. I really do. I saw her in that episode of, I've forgotten the series where she played Wendy, a android gone nuts at the end. I like that. I thought, oh, okay, this is a good actress. We're going to see a good performance. But unfortunately, either due to directing or whatever choices they're making behind the scenes, she comes off as a block of wood most of the time. And then there's the fact that she's an accessory to murder, multiple murders, many times over, because she has her main antagonist, Alice, who is a sister of hers, long-lost sister. She keeps not bringing her in. Alice keeps killing people, lots of people, and Batwoman has the opportunity on multiple occasions to bring her in. In fact, in one case, she's actually got her captured and put into a cell that apparently Batman had in the Batcave. Who knew Batman was keeping people in cells? But anyway, she has her in there. Time to turn her over to the cops. You know, she is an accessory to multiple murders. And so I'm going to keep doing that because outrage sells. It's one of the reasons I don't get 1 billion views. Outrage sells. And I'm going to keep doing that because that one legitimately kind of outrages me. It's like, God, this is a character who keeps doing stupid stuff, people getting killed because of it, and she doesn't have any kind of recognition that this is happening. She's like, oh, yeah, well, okay, Alice killed 5 more people. Yeah, and you had her tied up. Why didn't you turn her over to the cops, you moron? I get that she's your sister, but come on, man, she's killing people. It's dumb. And then there's a lot of other dumb things that happen. And Ruby Rose, it's not just her performance. If you look at Ruby Rose, she is, in fact, anorexic. If you look at pictures of her, just in the red carpet and stuff, clearly anorexic. Just done. You can see all of the muscles and stuff in her throat. Her face is, sunken cheeks. Her arms are skinny as hell. She is a 97-pound anorexic. And so she's not a good fit for Batwoman. A Bat character has to be really intimidating. I mentioned it on that one episode I reviewed, but the best Batman, one of the best Batman scenes ever was in Justice League Unlimited. There was some crook who'd been going around stealing stuff. He was from a country called Casnia, and he had a different language, and he was going around stealing stuff belonging to Bruce Wayne in France. So Bruce goes over there, confronts him as Batman. The guy says in his own language, "You can't understand a word that I'm saying, and I wouldn't talk to you if you did." And in Casnian language, Batman says, "Yes, I do understand you, and yes, you will." And great. That's all you have to do. You got to be intimidating as Batman. And unfortunately, a 97-pound anorexic who's 5'2" or 6" or something like that is not in any way intimidating. She's just not. Let me go back up here. Let's see. This was a difficult piece of Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame, you can kind of get away with it, again, because the universe is not quite our universe. It's not quite our universe. It has some different rules. But, people like, how it should have ended and other things. Here you have people, right? You bring back people. Some of them were in, planes when they disappeared. Do they reappear in the air at 30,000 feet and fall to their doom? Some of these people were, crossing the street. Do they reappear and get hit by cars? things like that. Some of these people maybe had moved on to other relationships. Do they reappear and discover that their former wife is now hanging out with some new guy? How does that, they just kind of pushed all that aside and said, don't look at the man behind the curtains. Dark is the current fad. Yeah, I'm going to get into something about that in a minute. It was one of the things that struck me having to watch this with commercials. TV demands anorexic. Joaquin Phoenix lost over 50 pounds to do Joker. Ruby Rose was in Dark Matter. That's what it was. She was in Dark Matter. She played, in an episode, she played a really, really, what looked like it was an incredibly friendly, useful android who, among other things, was a pleasure droid and had sex with one of the people there. But she also did some really, concrete good things in terms of being able to take their ship's rations, which were crap, and make really good meals out of them. And then she flipped on a dime and became a murderous robot. I thought that was really good, and I thought, okay, with that we could see a good, thing out of her. TV demanding people who are anorexic, I don't think is 100% true. It is certainly true that the camera adds 5 pounds. I am about 10 pounds overweight. I look much worse than that. I know that my camera is adding weight to me. I get that that's a problem. I'm trying to work on it, partly because of the show and partly just for my own health. So I certainly understand that, you're going to be thinner, but she's short and she doesn't look intimidating. She doesn't do intimidating things. She just doesn't, she can't live up to a bat role. For a bat role, you really do need to be just intimidating as all hell. And again, Kevin Conroy did it perfectly one time. And all he said was, yes, I do understand you. And yes, you will talk to me. And there's a couple of other scenes, too. There's one in the one where they did the time travel to the Batman Beyond future, where Batman just grabs this guy and starts dragging him over to try to, interrogate him, and it's pretty intimidating. But then the older Bruce Wayne says, I can't believe I was ever this green. Takes the Batman and says, and then starts doing more interrogation that's way worse, way more intimidating. And then Batman, from our Batman, comes back and says, I think you better talk. I don't know if I can get my my associate here to keep him under control very longer. And the other character's going on, Batman as the good cop? Okay, this is weird, Jay says, no, she's normal size. No, Jay, I've seen pictures of her. I had one up. You can see all of these muscles and veins in her neck. Her cheeks are sunken. Her arms are tiny. And this is on screen. This is on camera. The camera is adding 10 pounds. I ran across this many years ago when I met, God, I've forgotten the actress's name now. Shot Terms of Endearment in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I lived. Deborah Winger. I realized just how much weight the camera adds because I met her in person, shook her hand, and it was like shaking skin and bones. It was like a skeleton. I had to keep from recoiling. When I shook her hand, it was like, oh my God, I can't show how this is horrifying. She looks normal on camera. But, that's because the camera was adding 10 pounds. In Ruby Rose's case, it's not adding 10 pounds. You look at that costume, and it's still, when it's skin tight, it's still tiny. She's tiny. I mean, she really is. If you look at the pictures of her on the red carpet, it's amazing. It's amazing how thin she is. Let's see. Violent Space Canadians, Jay says. Yeah. Super Cruise 63 says, like Dark Matter, shame it was cut. I followed Dark Matter pretty closely. If I was doing reviews, then I would have reviewed that show. There says, Batman used the bat to scare criminals. Yeah. The original thing was he said himself in his first issue, criminals are a cowardly and superstitious lot. And so that's why he dressed as a giant bat. Kijay says, now I have seen skinny, shorter women but be intimidating. Yes, you can do it, but you have to know them and understand how their limits are broken. Yeah. Is it possible for her to be intimidating? Maybe. But she'd have to play this character radically different than she is. What she's playing now is largely soap opera with her main antagonist, long-lost sister, who she's letting get away with multiple murders, which can only make her an accessory. She knows what this woman is. She knows that she's going to start killing people. It's why I'll keep reviewing that show, because not only that is horrifying, there are many, many other things. Oh, have you seen the special effects for that thing? They do far better special effects for it, for stuff like fan films. You know, Star Trek Continues had special effects that were great. These look like somebody's, I can't make them, but they look like some, you know, kind of incompetent is making them. They're terrible when you have explosions and stuff. You go, that right there is CGI. That is clearly CGI, you know. And they're doing stuff like, they set the thing in Chicago, which I like. Always thought Chicago was a great place to set this. Chicago has, used to live there. I lived for about 10 years in Chicagoland. Chicago has a very, very long history that predates Al Capone being a very rough town. And so setting it there, same way as they did with Batman movies under Chris Nolan. Perfect. And I used to drive all the time on Lower Wacker Drive from one side of the Loop, and the Loop is the area with big buildings and stuff where a lot of business stuff happens and big financial things that are bound by the elevated trains in what looks like a loop. And under the Loop is Lower Wacker Drive, and it's much faster to get from one end of the Loop to the other on Lower Wacker, but at the same time, I always thought this would be a perfect place for a Batman scene. In fact, when I used to do there, I was a courier between Chicago and Toronto, so I needed to take Lower Wacker to get around, you know, more quickly. I would play the Danny Elfman Batman theme. I just thought this is a place back for it. And well, guess what they did in the first movie? They had a scene that took place in Lower Wacker. Awesome. Great. You missed what I was saying. Yeah, the CW shows are soap operas with poor to adequate fight choreography. Yes, I was talking about Mary Wiseman. Oh, from Star Trek Discovery. She's normal sized, but fanboys say she's fat because they're idiots. Yes. She is a completely normal woman. You know, if you met her in person, it would not be like shaking Deborah Winger's hand. It would be shaking like a normal person's hand. But the camera adds 10 pounds. I think if you met the rest of the cast, they would be thin as rails. But yeah, she's a normal person. I have no problem with her figure whatsoever. And it's in part because I know what the camera's doing to her. But I have no problem with that character's weight whatsoever. She's normal. She's normal. She's not fat. She is a normal woman. You know, when you get into people, even older actors, Marilyn Monroe, a beautiful woman, very voluptuous, but a more normal figure. She probably couldn't get hired today. You know, they go with the anorexics because of the fact that the camera's adding 10 pounds. I don't think she could get hired today. And the reason, you know, that a lot of women have breast implants is because when you're that thin, your breasts are small. And the camera not only is adding 10 pounds, but they want you to have big breasts. So the women will get breast implants. You know, you couldn't do Marilyn Monroe today. She would not be able to be hired. It's just a fact of life. So I'm going to be reviewing Batwoman. There's so many things that are just terrible about that show. And outrage sells. I won't be outraged about it. I'm not likely to go, this so sucks. I'm going to do my usual reviews where I'll walk through things. I say, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. This just doesn't make sense. Why is Batgirl letting this woman go all the time? Stuff like that. How it's written, how it's executed. I'll be doing that. I won't be like a lot of other reviewers who are wringing their hands and, this is so terrible, blah, blah, blah. That's not me. Super Cruz says, I prefer a little meat on the bones. I've got no problem with women who have normal figures. Women on TV, women in modeling, women in movies, they're mostly really rail thin. As I say, I will never forget shaking Deborah Winger's hands. I'm shaking her hand and I'm just going, I can't show just how repulsed I am right now. Hi, Miss Winger. It's nice to meet you. I've liked a lot of the work you've done in the past. I'm a fledgling actor myself. I like you very much. Thank you. It was really that bad. I had to keep myself from not showing that I was repulsed by even shaking her hand. I was floored. Look at somebody like Michael Jackson. After I shook Deborah Winger's hand and I was looking at Michael Jackson, who looked, until he died, looked thin as hell. And I went, okay, if the camera's adding 10 pounds on him, the guy must look like Skeletor in real life, Let's see. Jay says, yeah, the CW shows are so popular with poor to adequate fight comedy. Movies and TVs are basically insane in terms of appearance. Surely, if you really think about it. Oh, God. Don't even get me started on action sequences. I watch things where characters will be... there was a Justice League animated movie. And Superman twice chucked Batman hard enough to smash over brick walls. Okay. Batman should be dead the first time. Action movies have gotten this way ever since the advent of CGI. When a director can do anything, the action goes completely over the top. And things that should kill people don't. They barely injure them at all. There's a scene in, I think it's Star Trek Into Darkness, where Kirk is sliding down a very steep incline to the bottom of it. He's sliding so fast, and it's such a steep incline that when he hits the bottom, he's going to be dead, or he's going to shatter his legs and pelvis. And, they do this all the time in action movies, stuff that should kill people, just doesn't. They shrug it off. Oh, okay, I just get myself up and, okay, I'm okay now. No, man, you should be dead. And that's a problem with CGI. And they've done it now on Batwoman, too. There's a scene where a woman who is, for Batwoman's sake, is pretending to be Batwoman, but then she's hit by this railgun projectile that not only hits her in the chest, come on, man, you're talking about ballistics level speed. That's going to kill you right there. But it didn't kill her. It smashed her through a brick wall and down 2 stories. And she's okay eventually. She's fine. No big deal. Okay, I'm fine. Let's go. It's stupid stuff like that. It really bothers me in terms of the action movies. It was fine when it was back in the 80s and you had practical things and you had real stuntmen. You could only do stunts that made a certain level of sense. But when you got CGI and you can do anything that you want, the action becomes completely insane. It drives me nuts. Jay says, you have to go? Have time for one episode of Mandalorian? Oh, okay. Watch that one. If I'd been reviewing at the time, I would review that one. That was a good show, I thought. You were talking with a friend, the modeling and fashion industry when you were 11 years old. It's sick. Yes. And not only is it sick for the women who are in that, who are constantly basically starving themselves for their whole life and are really thin, but it really does give, women who are reading the magazines and stuff a completely ridiculous idea of what they should be looking like. When the low-rise jeans were a fad, for a decade or so, I was just like, come on, man. Those look terrible on you. Unless you are actually rail thin, and skin and bones like those models, that looks terrible on you. Real women with real hips and, real actual, muscle and a little bit of fat like normal women have, it looked awful. I was really thrilled when they finally went back up to the waist. Ladies, trust me, it looks much better, when we can see a curve here, as opposed to a little bit of fat hanging out of this, ridiculous low-rise jeans. Jay says, you were talking with a friend? Yeah, Jay says, apparently Insanity sells the soap. Yeah, oh yeah. Marshall says, not to mention the drugs. Cute girls can wear anything. Yeah. But for the most part, when I was old enough that when that low-rise jean thing was the thing, my kids were growing up, and some of them were wearing it, and I'm just like, I couldn't tell them, really. I couldn't say, you look like shit in there. You need to go and change into something that comes up to your waist. I couldn't say that. But everywhere I'd look, I'd be like, okay, there's 1 out of 50 who's skinny enough that this looks good. And then there's everybody else. And you're just like, go up to your waist. It looks way better. Good night, happy peoples. Jay says, good night to you, Jay. Thank you very much for showing up for my live stream. And, happy rest of the night and whatever you got to do. So, back to Crisis on Infinite Earths on CW. So I got through with the first episode, and it had a lot of stupid, but I did really like when Oliver, knew it was his last stand, but he was doing it because the longer he fought, the more people he could save. Okay, liked that very much. His death, I thought, was well done. Probably more impactful to people who watched that show than me, but I thought it was well done. It was still moving. Then we got into the Batwoman episode, and, I disliked that character in the first place. But they had a couple of things happen in that Batwoman episode that was interesting and affected me personally in terms of emotionality. So they got Bruce Wayne with Kevin Conroy, the voice that is associated with Bruce Wayne for at least 2 generations of people now. And I thought that was a neat thing. I thought that was good. If he hadn't been a crazed psychopath, which is what he was. Didn't like that whole sequence. I thought that there was a moment, when he died and, basically killed him, kicked him backwards into some kind of electrical transformer and he was electrocuted. But 2 things happened there. 1, it was like Batwoman killed him almost. And 2, Supergirl, who is faster than a speeding bullet, could have saved him just by running over and grabbing him before he even had a chance to hit it. And she didn't. She held back Batwoman and said, "No, it'll kill you." I thought that was real dumb. And I didn't like the way they turned Kevin Conroy into a psychopath. So I didn't like that. I was a lot more fond of when they met Brandon Routh's Superman. I was a lot more fond of that. Although I didn't like what happened to him at the end of the Flash one. But they had Brandon Routh. This was supposed to be my Superman, my 1978 Superman that I loved, that I grew up with and thought was the best way that character had ever been written. A lot of people today say it's corny and silly, but I'm telling you, it's not actually. If you know this character's backstory, if you have lived this character's backstory like I did, I have a lot in common with this character. I said so in my review. I have a lot of common with this character. I understand this character better than any of the writers that are currently writing for him for DC. And call me, guys. Just call me, because I can give you script ideas. I can't really script, but I can give you script ideas, and I can explain them in a way that'll make this character compelling again. He's not compelling now because he's way overpowered to begin with. But beyond that, they don't know how to write him. They have never experienced what I have experienced and what he has experienced. They cannot write this character, and they cannot make him compelling. Call me, DC. Call me. Let me edit your book. Just let me edit your book. I will cut out the crap. I will tell you, rewrite this to be like this, and I'll explain it to you. Hell, I will take you out to a rural area where he was and leave you there for a week. And then I'll bring you back in, and then maybe you can write this character. But as it is, they don't have the life experience. They're only urbanites. They don't know what it's like to live and work in a very rural area. They just don't know. And so they can't write this character correctly. Said so in my review. You can go back and watch it if you want. And when I'm done, maybe I'll put a link to it. Or at least the salient part. I took out some clips that included where I talked about why they can't write this character anymore. So they got Brandon Routh playing that character. They made it very clear that he was the Chris Reeve Superman, even referencing the movie that all of us want to forget, Superman 3, when he said, believe it or not, this isn't the first time I've gone nuts and tried to kill myself, or fight myself. Clearly a reference to Superman 3, which was not that great, we thought, but there it was. Hang on a second. I got to drop out a couple of my windows that just dinged on me. I don't want things dinging while I'm doing this. I wasn't real thrilled with making him a version of the Kingdom Come Superman. The Kingdom Come Superman was a very, very different animal. This was a guy who had seen everybody that he loved and knew killed by the Joker. And he just gave up. He just gave up. He went to live at the Fortress of Solitude and had to be convinced to come back. He just gave up. And putting that in, I did not like, because again, this was my Superman. My Lois Lane was now dead. My Perry White, my Jimmy Wilson, all dead. I understand what they were going for in terms of him suffering loss, but my characters being dead, I did not like. I think you could have done it, not make him the Superman from, the totally different book, but just make him Superman and have to get him. And we don't see Lois or any of the others maybe because it's just they're just have to get him quick and go. Think that would have worked. But having all those characters that were my characters killed off, and my Superman turned into that. And it was kind of interesting that he was editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet because, the Golden Age Superman had eventually become editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet, or the Daily Star in his universe, believe it or not. So I didn't like that. But I could cope with it. I could deal with it because Brandon Routh is a decent Superman from that era. I thought that was okay. I thought that was fine. I didn't like they killed off all of those characters that I knew and loved, but I thought it was okay. So I guess pretty much, relationship stuff out of the way, we get to the Flash episode. Now, as I think Jay or Larry mentioned, I'm not sure which, they did get to a point where it looked like the Flash was going to have to sacrifice his life. He said goodbye to his friends like twice. It was just, and again, the universe is about to end around them, and multiverse is about to end around them, and he's busy telling people goodbye and all this stuff. It should just be, I gotta go save the world. It's been great, guys. Bye, and just do it. And that's why when Flash from Earth 90, from the 90s era Flash, 1990 Flash, when he just did the thing he did, and I thought, oh, finally. Somebody who sees the gravity of this whole situation. Screw it. I got to do it, Barry. Hey, said Flash had to die. Didn't say which one. Taking your speed and I'm going. Good. That's how that should be handled. You don't have to have, and they did have the one flashback, the one relationship-based flashback that was about 4 seconds long. That's the way to do it. If you were going to do it with Barry, you would have done the same thing. Sorry, I got to go. Sorry, it's time for me. Bye. And maybe a farewell where he's starting to hug somebody, but he has to leave, and it's pulling away from the hand, something like that. Not this hugging. Oh gosh, I wish it him to go. Blah blah blah. And so when Barry Allen of Earth 90 says, "Nope, it's me," I was like, finally, somebody doing something super heroic, awesome. So, him dying I was okay with. He was not a character that I was ever that emotionally invested in. If you go back and you watch the 1990s Flash series, it's okay. It was the first time they'd done anything, really attempting to do super speed, and that was pretty good. But it wasn't great. It was never a great show. The stories were never that great, and that's why it only lasted, I think, a season. But him being there, and I knew he was in there from, I'd seen him a couple of times in the TV series, the current CW Flash. And that's where I thought it was kind of cool, because, oh, look, this guy that I knew is coming back. And that happened several times before I really, just kind of got out of watching the show. So him sacrificing himself, I thought, well, it was good. Okay, cool. Then we get this side thing where they have to go... Okay, that was one of the relationship things that I thought was dumb, and what I'm about to talk about is, and I thought should never have been in this series at all, and that's the notion that they were going to try to bring Oliver back to life. Guys, I'm sorry. Sometimes you just have to deal with loss. Sometimes people die, and there's nothing you can do about it. That just shouldn't have been in there. But that said... there was a cameo that I enjoyed quite a lot. And that was when they went to Earth 666 and hooked up with Lucifer Morningstar, the devil. Okay. I like that scene. I haven't watched all of that series, but including it and having him there, doing something that made sense to the plot. Constantine couldn't do what he needed to do. He needed to get something from Lucifer. Okay, I like that. And Lucifer giving, and I don't know the character's name, Oliver's daughter, this look that he always gives people when he's trying to tempt them. I thought, this is good. That's good. That's a nice little cameo. If you're going to do it, if you're going to have somebody that you're trying to bring back from the dead, okay. Yeah, it's Constantine is the character's name. I meant Oliver's daughter. I don't remember her name. But I thought, okay, that's a good cameo. I like that. Bring in some more. That's all right. I suppose that means now that Earth 666 is now part of the new universe, which means you could have additional crossovers with Satan. That was okay. Obviously we've got a lot of stuff in here that now you can do crossovers with ease. You don't have to have alternate universes, and they showed it in the last episode. That you can have people just coming over from one city to another. And so that was okay. That I think is okay, and I like that cameo. But so the Flash episode was okay. It was okay, except the end. They killed my Superman for no good reason. They just killed him. Killed him outright. I thought they were going to bring him back. I thought they were going to bring him back somehow, because Crisis on Infinite Earths involved, at the very end, it involved a scene in which Silver Age, Golden Age Superman are together, and they know that they have to do this one last thing to kill the Monitor, and Golden Age Superman is the one who does it. And I thought, okay, if you're substituting my Superman for the Golden Age Superman, which is kind of what they were doing, then it would have been good to have that same scene, where, oh, we thought he was dead. And then you have this scene where they have to do the thing, and he's the one to go do it. And maybe he even dies doing it. That would have been okay. That would have been a good death for my Superman. To simply have him disappear into nothingness and be replaced by Lex Luthor. No. No, 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 no. Hated it. Hated it. No. So, didn't like that. Didn't like that at all. Now we get into tonight's episodes. And what time is it? So it's almost 11. So that would have been 8 to 9, 9 to 10. Okay. All right. People who have been watching that, I can spoil now. So we get into tonight's episodes. And it was, again, just filled with an enormous amount of relationship work here, there, and everywhere. And it just detracted from the action. In terms of the first one, where the ending was where they rebooted the universe, that was done really, really differently in the comics. And I understand there was probably no way to replicate that. Here's what happened with the comics. In DC Comics lore in the Silver Age, the creation of the universe was said by the Guardians of the Universe, the heads of the Green Lantern Corps. While it's possible to travel back in time in that universe, that event can never be witnessed without serious consequences. And they had a character who did it, and it caused serious consequences. The interesting thing about it is that scene has a small whirlpool thing with a hand underneath it. The hand closes, opens up, and then there's this, the Big Bang. The implication is that this hand must be God's. That for decades, the implication was that this was the hand of God creating the universe. So what they did with the Anti-Monitor is they replaced you found out that wasn't God's hand, it was the Anti-Monitor. And the Spectre came in. Now, the Spectre is, hands down, in the DC Comics universe, the most powerful character in it. He can do almost anything. In fact, I don't know anything that he can't do. So the Spectre in that one, now I was expecting this. I was expecting this to happen when they made Oliver the Spectre. I thought, okay, he's going to be the most powerful character in this whole universe. He's going to be the one that's going to stop him, because that's what happened in the comics. What happened in the comics was the Spectre, he can make himself huge, he can make himself tiny, he can deal with spiritual stuff, he can deal with that thing and all over the place. He's just the most powerful character in it. And he's the one that stops the Monitor from doing what he's doing, and then the universe, boom, and we have a single universe where all of these characters were all in the same universe. So I was expecting something like that. I wasn't expecting what we got. Maybe they just thought, oh, hand of God things, that's just silly, we can't do that. But, you guys, I know you hate Christianity. I am totally aware that people in Hollywood hate Christianity with a passion. But I don't see why you couldn't have done that. I really don't see why you couldn't have done that. That would have made sense. So that episode, again, not a hell of a lot happens there. It's just, the Flash finding these people, getting them together, having a fight that is, and any time they've had those shadow demons. The shadow demons in Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics were a very integral part of having fights. They were the proxies for the Anti-Monitor. And it worked well because you had all of these superheroes. You could have an army of bad guys, but you have an army of superheroes, so it works. When they're all fighting, and it happened in the Supergirl one too, when they're all fighting, you're like, this is an army. You guys may be super powerful, but this is thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe billions of these shadow demons, and you should be completely overrun. You should just be completely overrun. There should be no way that you can stop all of these things. And sometimes you wondered how they're stopping it. It's like, are these shadow demons so fragile that Batwoman can give them a kick and kill them? Because that happened. If you watch that, Batwoman goes around doing, her usual choreographed fighting sequences. She'd kick one in the stomach and it would poof disappear. Okay, well maybe that's why they did so well against these giant armies, because they're just so incredibly fragile. Sneeze at them and they disappear. Who the hell knows? But we didn't get the ending that we got in the comics, that's for sure. But we did get the Earth changed into one that now has all these characters on it. I think that's probably good in terms of storytelling for them, because it now means that, we don't even know which of the CW's shows are now in this universe. We don't even know for sure if some of the other stuff, because they had a real cameo with Flash from the DC film universe. Not quite sure what that means, because, the one thing they can't do is touch that continuity. I wish they could. If it was me, right, I would just dump all of those guys from the film universe, and I would say, every once in a while, we're going to have a big movie where we get people from the TV universe over as the Justice League, like they kind of teased at the end. And I liked that they teased that at the end, that they had the Hall of Justice that we had first seen in 1970s. I, growing up, I remember it. The Hall of Justice that we had first seen in the TV show Super Friends. Later at the Hall of Justice, Yes, Larry, Stargirl is coming. I'm going to be interested to see how that works. Stargirl originally started out, by the way, as a character living in Nebraska. I'm sort of hoping that they do that. And I hope they execute it properly and don't just have Nebraska being nothing but fields. A lot of it is, but most of our population is concentrated in Lincoln, Omaha, million people, and Grand Island, much smaller city, but that is where most of our population is. We're not agricultural. If they put her in a small town and they write it correctly, that's okay with me. But it'd be kind of nice to have a superhero operating from Nebraska. She was from Nebraska. Yeah, Larry, Ted Knight doing that. I can't do it. Meanwhile, back at the Hall of Justice, he did it much better than I did. But yeah, the Hall of Justice that we first saw then, and we've started to see recurring. I think we first started seeing it in Justice League Unlimited in its last season, and then it has been picked up by things like Young Justice and things like that. So we have started to see that thing coming. In terms of what happens there in that, I assume that this was basically a Legend of Tomorrow heavy thing that people who watch that show would be a lot more interested and invested in than I am. The end of it, however, where, they teased Justice League, I thought that was good. I really did think that was good. I hope they clean the place up and it becomes the Justice League. And I hope they never do another film Justice League ever again. And they only allow these characters, we say, we have retconned everything. These characters now come over. We leave all of their personal stuff alone in their own shows. But every once in a while, Dark Side invades, and we bring these guys out and do a movie on them. I think that would be okay. You could do that. That would be fine with me. In terms, leaving out the relationship stuff, in terms of how they do some of the action stuff and how these characters work, and, the universe that they've put them in, which is similar to our own, but not exact, because, again, Kara's running around with a pair of glasses, and every time Supergirl's hairstyle changes, so does Kara's, and she looks exactly like Supergirl. And in fact, they've teased this a couple of times. I understand that they, put her in a position where they have to get the Martian Manhunter to come up as her so that it looks like they're two different people. Okay, but still, it's a universe where a pair of glasses can work. So I think it's okay if you want to just say, okay, we're taking this universe, this one we've just created, and we have the cameo with the Flash, so that maybe means that this whole DC universe thing is gone. I would be fine with that. Just take these people out from time to time and have a big battle that you have to have them all in. Introduce a Wonder Woman. I'm only going to do more Wonder Woman movies, probably more Shazam movies. Maybe you could ret her out of the way. Or not her, but a backstory. You can have that character and retcon her off and say the first time she meets up with the Justice League is when these guys come over and do a Justice League movie. I'd be okay with that. As long as you leave out the soap opera stuff in their own shows. Like they did with Crisis on Infinite Earths. They didn't have a lot of character development going on in that show, with very few exceptions. There were some. Didn't have a ton of character development going on because they had this many superheroes to deal with. But anytime that they were doing a tie-in, when, because as I said at the beginning, when Marv Wolfman made a cameo in here, sent out the message to every single one of the editors on every single one of the books that being involved with Crisis in some way was non-optional. They had to do it. So the character development that was maybe associated with the Crisis was in their books. That's where it belonged, was in their books. And so the main story just proceeded without a hell of a lot of character development, with the exception really of the Golden Age Superman and what happened to him, which I thought was good. Justice Society coming to CW? I don't know. I don't know what they'll call it. Maybe this is just where the Legends of Tomorrow are going to meet. I don't know. As I say, they tease it. There was a point at which you actually heard the Super Friends music. Dun, da, 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 da. You heard it in the background. I am confused by the end. I am confused by the very end. Because we've now been told that all of these universes are one. And yet at the very end, we do see other alternate universes that included Brandon Routh's Superman doing a flying over Earth, smile to the camera, fly away, with, the John Williams Superman theme underneath it. What does that mean exactly? I don't know what that meant. We're supposed to have one universe now. He should not exist. The only Superman that should exist is the one that's on Earth 1. I don't know. Superguru63 says, I hope to do another Aquaman movie. The first one is awesome. Yeah. That's where they finally got it right. They finally got it right. That's a universe, a piece of the universe for Justice League that we're seeing that is close enough to our universe that it makes sense, but has its own little rules that make it possible for Aquaman to be somebody like you saw. In real life, of course, we don't have the sunken city of Atlantis or any of that stuff. It's all just, marine life. But, that was a great movie. And I like Shazam, too, for the most part. There were pieces of it that I thought were kind of, I thought they maybe did Billy Batson a little bit over the top. But the idea of a child, or in this case a teenager, but Billy Batson is usually been about 10 years old in the comics. But the idea of a child being that super powerful and not knowing what to do with it, and how to do it right, I thought that was good. And they did that right. And again, they put it in a piece of the universe that is very much like our own, but has its own little rules that make it make more sense, and we can, suspend our disbelief a bit. So when you put it into our world, that this just won't cut it. You have to remember. That's your starting point. That is your first superhero from 1938. That is your starting point. You must make this a slightly different universe than ours so that it works. You just can't do it any otherwise. Am I sure about Atlantis? Pretty sure. Yeah, pretty sure about Atlantis. Who knows? Maybe, but I'm pretty sure about Atlantis. That's my take on Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was an interesting undertaking, inasmuch as they couldn't do this. That was too much. They didn't. I mean, you can do it in the comics. You can do it in the comics because you're not really doing character development. You're seeing these characters who are fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, and then a bunch of them who are really the core group, but much larger than what you saw in CW. Core group getting together and doing the really heavy lifting. And that included the Golden Age Superman and the way that he went out. An interesting thing about the way he went out. There were some interesting ideas with that. The Golden Age Superman was the one who basically gave the antimatter what was left of him because he was damn near, he was trying to pull himself back together damn near a ghost, from a ghost. He says, "I won't die until you die, Superman." And Superman Golden Age Superman just says, "That's it. That is it." Flies at him and gives him a giant punch that destroys him into a giant thing. Well, the way that they took out that Superman, because they couldn't have two Supermen in this new universe, the way they took him out was there was another character, the son, it was Alexander Luthor, the son of Lex Luthor from Earth 3. And that universe was where all of the bad guys, all of our characters we think were good guys were bad, were evil. But Lex Luthor was kind of an Iron Man, kind of superhero. And he'd married Lois Lane from that universe, and they had a son, Alexander. And towards the beginning of that series, just like, with Jor-El, he sent his son off on a rocket, but it was an interdimensional rocket. He was intentionally sending him to like Earth 1, where he knew that those characters could take care of him. But he aged rapidly and turned into something with really interesting superpowers. And at the very end of that, he took Superman from Golden Age Superman and Golden Age Lois Lane and took them off into limbo. And also he took a character that was also a very interesting one, because years before, they had established, believe it or not, that there was an Earth Prime in this universe and in multiverse, and that was our universe. The Flash made a couple of crossovers to it, where he actually went to the DC Comics offices. In fact, one of the writers for The Flash had been sitting in his car, daydreaming about what was he going to do for the next... He was on Earth Prime, our universe, and he was sitting in his car thinking about what he was going to do for the next Flash story. And then somehow he's transported into that universe. And he's like, holy crap, what is going on? And the Flash keeps losing. And that writer has to plot Flash out of his problems. He essentially writes the adventure that the Flash is in with him in it so that he can get that done, and then goes back to his own universe. I thought that was a really interesting story, and they did it a couple of times. But one time that they did it, there it was a Clark Kent on Earth Prime, our universe. He was named Clark Kent. It's almost a joke. His last name was Kent, but they named him Clark after Superman. In the comics, because it was a comic book. It's our universe, so it was a comic book. And they made what they did in Crisis on Infinite Earths is they grabbed that Superboy from our universe and took him out for this big fight. Well, that Superboy had nowhere to go. They didn't want a Superboy. It was kind of dumb. They resurrected a Superboy, a different character, much later on. But they didn't want Superman to have ever been Superboy. So they didn't want that character anymore. So they took him and Lois, Golden Age Lois and Golden Age Superman, and this Alexander Luthor. He took them off into some kind of limbo to live happily ever after. Good. I always liked Golden Age Superman for a variety of reasons. The guy was originally written and drawn with squinty eyes, just squinty eyes. I don't know why. It was different from Clark Kent. Clark Kent had his eyes open, but Superman had squinty eyes. He was always drawn that way, and by the time that I was getting into it, he was older. He had gray hair. He was a guy who was very experienced. He was, editor-in-chief of his newspaper, liked that character a lot. So when they took him off into limbo, I thought, good. Then they brought him back for one of the reboots, and they did it in a terrible way. It was Infinite Crisis. That Superboy had gone nuts. Inside of limbo, they were watching, and they to my surprise, they actually got it kind of right. They were all able to look at the universe, the new universe that had been created, and they discovered that over time, and this had actually happened, over time, some of these characters who were lighter got darker and darker and darker, and there was a lot more death and destruction because we started to see that being propagandized in our own culture, and it was hitting our comic books. Still is. And so they decided that they were going to set it all right. They were going to set it back to something like Earth 2. Superman smashes his way out of limbo. Among other things, Superboy pushes the planet Oa out, because these are like from the Silver Age, and they were severely overpowered. And Superboy goes nuts, and he's an antagonist for the next several years at various books. Did you have to? And Superman and Lois both die. Just outright die. No, sending them off for a happily ever after was a good thing for those characters. I don't know why they did it. Other than by then, the inmates were running the asylum at DC, and these people who get awards for their crap are really nothing more than hacks. Everybody at DC, I don't care what awards you've got, you're hacks. You're downright hacks. And I know it, because I am a Fandi Master, and that means nothing is new, nothing is original. So I know what you're doing. I can see exactly what you're doing. So that's one of the things that they did after they rebooted this universe. They went back and they told Silver and Golden Age stories over again. And then they reboot and they tell the same stories over again. Guess what, you guys? You have no creativity. You haven't had any creativity since Julius Schwartz departed in 1985 or 86. He was the one who had the creativity, and he created new villains. You guys are recycling the old stuff by saying, oh, look at how we've executed it differently. Guess what, guys? It's not new. It's not original. I read those books and I go, oh, well, okay, so they've updated it a little bit. Superman Red, Superman Blue, that was a Silver Age comic. And they did it in the 1990s, and they just made it a little bit different. You guys have no creativity. Come up with somebody new. The last person to come up that was new came out of the DC animated universe. It was Harley Quinn. She's now a mainstay in whatever reboot they've got going on. But she came out of the DC animated universe. Thank you, Bruce Timm. Bruce Timm had creativity. He could take some of these old characters and old stories even, and it was like the MCU. A lot of things were, like similar to the way that they might have happened in comics, but different enough that they were also creative. There were a few that they took straight out of the comics. There was one called For the Man Who Has Everything, and it was about Superman's birthday and some stuff that goes on there. Well, that's an Alan Moore story. Alan Moore was the guy who wrote Watchmen. Alan Moore, when he was with DC, wrote most of the best comics that they had. He is an amazing storyteller. There is somebody who should and had been getting awards. He deserves them. He is not a hack. He does original stuff. But DC Animated Universe did take basically that episode as a whole and made it into an animated episode. But that was okay because Alan freaking Moore is a genius. You guys running the farm at DC are freaking hacks. And Alan Moore was eventually, for a variety of reasons, totally disillusioned with DC and is not really writing comics anymore. He went and he did some stuff that is his own titles, his own universe for a different company. They're brilliant. He is a brilliant writer, period. He's a brilliant writer on comic books, and you guys at DC are hacks. Whatever awards you've got to your name, you don't deserve them. You're hacks. You should be fired and somebody else hired. Larry says, 1994, Harley Quinn was born in the Batman animated adventures. Yes. She started in Batman animated series, moved on to other things, and is now a mainstay in both comics and somebody who's in Suicide Squad in the films. So, yes, thank you, Bruce Timm, for being the real last creative individual to be associated with DC Comics. You guys are hacks. Call me about Superman. You do not get him. You think that he's a goody two-shoes guy, and that's not what it is. I can tell you exactly how that character works. Hire me as an editor for the Superman comics. You can give me stories, I'll just say, nope, that's wrong, rewrite, that's wrong, here's how it should go rewrite that story. I can edit that book. You guys are hacks. That's what I had to think about the film, the Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was a valiant attempt. It's 11:20. It was a valiant attempt to do this, but they couldn't do this because they didn't have this gigantic cast of characters. It worked better with a gigantic cast of characters. If you want to see it, there are many, many different versions of it. I like the, I've forgotten the, I should look, I have it sitting on my computer someplace. There is the last really collected one that has a whole lot of background information in terms of how they were doing the story, memos they sent off to editors, and all kinds of stuff like that. Very, very informative. I know where you can get it. If you can, go out and buy it if you want. It's always BitTorrent. Excuse me, BitTorrent. Excuse me. That always happens for some reason, but you can find it. It's very, very good. Crisis on Infinite Earths in comics was epic. It changed a lot of things. When they said worlds will live, worlds will die, they were talking about many, many universes that they had running at the same time. That's what I thought about it on TV. Valiant attempt, bogged down with relationship stuff that did not belong there, that should have been about the characters and how they were reacting to this, and some stupid, like trying to evacuate billions of people off of a planet in about 3 hours. You know what's going to happen if you try to evacuate billions of people in 3 hours? They're going to be trampling each other to death and shooting each other and stabbing each other to get to the frickin' ships. And you're sure as hell not going to get 3 billion of them, which I think is what they said got, something like 3 billion. You're not going to save 3 billion people in like 3 or 4 hours. It's not happening. You might as well just not tell them in the first place and let them just, wow, holy crimson skies of death, and they die. Don't even tell them. There's no point, Marvel had more characters in their cinematic universe. Yeah, when Marvel got around to doing, that was the thing. Kevin Feige, man, here's somebody who is creative. He can take ideas that were similar enough from what were in comic books, but turn them over into this universe that he's building and build it all up to Thanos. And, on your left. And here come all the superheroes coming in. The armies of Wakanda, all these superheroes they thought were dead or were dead before, all coming in for the giant battle. And that worked well. It worked so well, in fact, that if it were me, I would have ended the MCU at the end of Endgame. I would have put a period on that because that is the logical closure point for everything they'd done for the next 10 years, for that 10 years. But he couldn't do that because it was making a crap ton of cash. They will do basically what they always do, and what I think is happening to Star Wars. They will do this until there are no more butts in the seats, and that will be a tragedy. It was a great thing when they had this giant 10-year-long arc that culminated with the best episodes and the death of Iron Man and some good, happy endings for like Steve Rogers. That was perfect. Just put a period on that and say, fade out the end and nothing else after that. I would have been perfectly happy with that. So, yeah, that's kind of why Endgame worked well, because they had all of these superheroes, and they did in Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics. It worked well because they had all these superheroes who could battle this huge multiversal threat. And the valiant attempt on CW, but can't compare and isn't really, it's constantly bogged down with pulling the train to a shocking halt long enough to do relationship stuff that really doesn't belong in it. There is, however, one more thing I want to talk about that isn't related to Crisis on Infinite Earths. I have apparently lost complete touch with some of popular culture because I do not watch commercials. Any commercials that I see tend to be on YouTube, and I'm just sitting there waiting to hit skip. I'm paying no attention to the advertising. It's, wait, can I hit skip yet? Oh, crap. This is one where the thing's going to go through the entire 15 seconds. Well, it's only 15 seconds. I will stare at the walls or do something and wait around. Don't pay attention to it at all. Oh, good. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1, skip. I have not seen, and then when I watch stuff like I did not watch the episodes. This is the first time that I watched the episodes for Crisis on Infinite Earths as they were being aired. The others I watched within an hour or so from shady websites, and I didn't. There's no commercials on those. They've all been cut. So I don't see commercials. I don't watch much TV. I watch no TV. If I'm going to watch something, it's basically from shady websites, or if I'm really interested, I watch Doctor Who as it airs in the BBC, even though I'm in the US, because there are sites that restream. So I watch Doctor Who while it airs for my videos, and I always watch something twice when I'm going to review it. Generally, I didn't tonight, but I usually watch something twice. The first time is to see if I enjoy it. The second time to watch for things about the mechanics of making the film and all that, so that I can talk about it intelligently on my reviews and not just being the the guy who's screaming about how bad it is. That's not my review style. Larry says, happy birthday, Bill. Starting my second half of the century. Actually, I did that 5 years ago. I'm 55 now. But I'm planning to just chase medical science as long as I possibly can. I think there's some chance that they may figure out how to get rid of replicative failure, which is why you age. If they do, I'm going to be the first in line. But I'm still going to chase medical science. But the reality is that, now I've got statistically less than 20 years on the planet. That kind of comes as a surprise to me. And my grandparents both died in a very late age. My father died early, but that's due to health complications that there was nothing to do anything about. My mom is in her 70s and is still running around like crazy. They finally are forcing her to retire on the 17th of this month, but end of this week. But she'd stay there until she died, and she does all kinds of physical stuff. She's in very good shape for her 70s. So, I got some genetics here. Maybe I'll last long. My grandparents were almost 100 years old. So maybe I'll, last that long. I don't know. But statistically, men of my generation died at about age 72. So I have something less than 20 years. But hey, I'm now retired. My show has got equipment that I can do 1080p, 60 frames per second while I'm streaming, and all of my videos from now on will be that. And I'm pretty sure that that's going to attract more viewers. My previous, format, while I think I was giving good reviews and differentiating myself from other people, coming at you at 720 frames and only 20 frames, 720p and 20 frames per second kind of sucked. This, on the other hand, frankly, I am now in a position where I'm going to be going back and getting some health care that I didn't have before because I've got the money. One of these will be dental. I don't want anybody to look really hard, but you can probably see in 720p, my teeth are not particularly straight anymore. They were at one time, but over the last 30 years, they have gotten unstraight. So one of the things that I'm going to look at is getting them straightened, and partly that's for this show. Larry says, our grandparents had hard lives, yet still live close to 100. Yeah, it always surprised the hell out of me. I mean, it was really devastating to my grandmother because she lived through my grandfather passing away and 2 of her children. And as a parent, the idea of my children passing before me is not one that I like to comprehend. Nobody does. She was pretty devastated by that. Fortunately or not, she passed away not too long after her second son passed away. But I got some genetics for it. Anyway, I'm not up on modern advertising. So I'm watching this, and I walked away to do other things during much of the ads, but I watched them. Ads have changed a lot since I was paying attention to them, and not for the better. They got a lot of CGI in them now, which, that doesn't surprise me. But they're very dark. They're very, very dark. It is more of how my children and now grandchildren, I don't have any grandchildren myself, I have I'm a great uncle. They have been propagandized from an early age in schools. In 12 years of compulsory education, and I talk about this in some of my political videos, they have been propagandized to believe that the world is a terrible, awful place, when in reality, they are, in fact, some of the most coddled rather, and well off, at least in the first world, generation to ever live. They didn't live through the Great Depression. They didn't have to fight World War II that killed off a ton of people, much more than any of the wars in Vietnam. They didn't have to fight Vietnam. And my generation was the first one that didn't have a war to fight. And we, if we tried to sign up, they wouldn't have taken us because we wouldn't know what to do with us in those numbers. But mine was the first generation that didn't have to fight a war, and we were pretty coddled. But next generation, and the one after that, incredibly coddled, and yet they have been indoctrinated to believe that the world is a terrible place, that non-scientific crap like, global climate change is, man's fault, and we need a worldwide communist government in order to stop it, or something stupid like that. And they think that everything in their life is terrible and everything around them is terrible, when in fact, they are living the best lives that any generation in the civilized world has ever lived. And yet they believe it to be terrible. And it is reflected clearly in the advertising. I've not paid any attention to advertising for many years. I started getting my entertainment off the internet circa 2004. So I have become completely disconnected from all of this for a long time. So when I look back at it now, I go, oh my God, even the ads are dark. They had an ad, I think it was for some kind of insurance company. I might be wrong about it, but they shot it like it was a horror movie. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, wait, who are you selling to? You're selling insurance. What's your audience here that you're selling to that wants to watch a horror movie? Amusingly enough, I saw, at least in my market, maybe I was seeing some local commercials too, but there were no less than four different cell phone carriers that were advertising. Got one from Sprint, got one from AT&T, got one from Verizon, got another one who's a smaller one that I've forgotten. There were four. I thought that was hysterical. Usually what you do if you're going to try to get ads like that is there only like one. Like AT&T will say, I want to spend ads on every single thing that we get in this. But no, there were four different ones. I thought that was hysterical. Larry says, my parents could educate these snowflakes in 5 minutes or less. Yeah, considering what they're learning, I've said it on other political videos, they have not been taught to read, nor write, nor perform the most basic math. And I know this by virtue of spending 2 years working as a IT instructor in what I always call in this show, the place that shall not be named. I saw it with my own eyes, and it's only gotten worse since then. That was circa 2008. It's only gotten worse. We're into 3 whole generations, mine included, that were not well educated, and now we are not teaching them a damned thing other than political correctness and how to find a safe space the moment you hear any idea that might challenge your belief system in any way, your socialist belief system, because that's what they're being, proselytized and brainwashed to believe. But in reality, they're living the most comfortable, coddled lives of any generation in the entire history of the world. If you're in the first world, your life is so good compared to everybody that came before you. Everybody, myself included. Much, much better lives. And yet they've been told it's terrible, and the advertising absolutely reinforces this. I couldn't believe it. I was watching this and going, wow, I am totally out of touch. This is part of reinforcing this negative view of the world that is totally ridiculous. All I can say to you guys, who are watching, and this show is aimed at you. You're the ones who are going through the relationship things. You're the ones who are thinking about this stuff and is important to you. Because I'm not the target market. I totally get it. Guys, listen to me. You live incredibly privileged lives. Don't believe this. Look outside your own window. Don't pay attention to the press. Don't pay attention to what you're seeing in your media. And don't pay attention to your teachers. Look out your window. And you tell me if what you see out your window bears any resemblance to what you're being told in your schools and in your popular culture, because it doesn't. They're two totally different things. What's outside your window is an incredibly privileged, rich lifestyle compared to anybody else. We have always had people who are poor in the United States that are fat. Go to any third world country, people are starving. Even our poor have good lives comparatively. Stop teaching cursive writing? Yeah, absolutely. That's problematic, but they don't teach them to read or write anyway, so it doesn't matter. Stop teaching history? Yes, which is why we get things like, I don't want to make this into a political video, but the reaction to Donald Trump is way, way, way out into the twilight zone. The left has just lost their minds, and they don't know history. Because if you knew history, you would discover that Donald Trump is largely just a Republican. He's not that much different than a lot of Republicans, both in and outside of my lifetime. And they stopped teaching civics. Yes, I think my generation was the last time we had a class actually called civics. I remember it very, very vividly because we got into a conversation about, because it was between wars. My generation didn't have to fight one. We got into a conversation about, let me take this off of here for a minute. We got into a conversation about Vietnam War and how the military had come up with battle plans that included nuking parts of Vietnam. And my teacher was on my side. And I got into an argument with one of the other students who said they should never have come up with those plans. And I said, no, that's their job. Their job is to come up with a lot of different plans. And it's why the military isn't controlled by those who are actually fighting. It is controlled by a civilian, the president. So the president can say, well, I'm not going to nuke them. Maybe this other, plan that you've come up with, we're not going to nuke them. But that's their job. It's their job to always come up with stuff like that, present it to a president, and the president could say, well, no, we're not going to do that, or yes, we are going to do that. So we got into an argument, and she was like, no, they shouldn't even have thought about that stuff. And I'm, no, that's what they do. That's their whole job. And that was my civics class. And I was really the last generation that had a civics. I don't know what they rolled it into something. I don't know what they call it off of the top of my head. But they rolled it into another subject that's not civics. It's something else. And these days it's just propaganda and proselytization and, frankly, outright brainwashing. It's frankly outright brainwashing. And I was really struck by it when I was watching the ads for this. So, wow. Let me see what time it is. Thank you, Windows. I did a Windows update. I'm one of the insiders on Windows. So I get betas. And I did an update on it. And down in the taskbar, it turned everything but my icons black. So now I can't just glance down and see what the time is. I have to click it so that I can see it. Giant pain in the ass. I'm going to see if I can talk to them because they'll actually give me support. They'll give me support because I am an insider. So when they want to hear bugs like this. Larry says lots of people wanted to use nukes to end Vietnam War. It was dragging on and on. Yeah, it was. It was just that, like today, in terms of geopolitics, it would be very difficult to get away with nuking anywhere. It would just be probably a gigantic mess and maybe an ultimate lose for the United States if they did that, because everybody in the world, including our allies, unless there was some really, really overriding thing that caused them, to say, okay, yeah, nuking them was all right. I don't think we can get away with it today very well. But yeah, there were lots of plans. The military always draws up lots of plans. They have plans for everything in the universe. It's part of what they do. And it's the job of a civilian, the president, to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this other thing. Give me another plan. Don't like that one. That one, and the losses are unacceptable or stuff like that. Or, bring me what you think is your number 2 plan. We're not going to nuke them. But yeah, they always said, and there were people who wanted it. But again, I think in terms of geopolitics, the U.S. probably couldn't have gotten away with it. But I can't even think of a situation now where you could get away with it. I mean, maybe if you knew I can think of one way. If somebody managed to nuke an American city, then you could get away with nuking them in response. But it would otherwise be pretty difficult. I think it would be very hard to, get away with nuking anybody. Yeah, tactical nukes with artillery, small nukes. Yeah, it's just very, very controversial. And if Trump tried it, he'd just be, crucified. A Democrat might be able to get away with tactical nukes, but if Trump tried it, he'd just be crucified by the entire world. You have to have an extenuating circumstance that's so great that the rest of the world would say, okay, all right, we're down with that. That works. So, it being on my clock on the wall that I can barely see, about 20 minutes to midnight, I think I'll probably just cut it here. That's really all I have to say about Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I hope you learned something both about Crisis on Infinite Earths and how it worked out on CW and how it was working out in the DC universe and how and why they did what they did. So thanks for watching. That is all the time that we have today for this episode of the highly acclaimed, world-renowned Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.